Chapter 192. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun were both taken aback. After looking at each other, they both stopped in their tracks. The Kunlun disciple who led the way was also taken aback. He hurriedly rushed over and supported He. He anxiously said, Xixiang, what happened to you? He waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He then saw Su Qingjun and Lu Chen behind him and nodded to them. Seeing that his expression was generally normal, it didn't seem like something serious had happened. Su Qingjun and Lu Chen then walked over. Su Qingjun looked at He and frowned. Xixiang, what happened to you? Why do you look so pale? He smiled bitterly. He was about to say something when suddenly the others seemed to have sensed something. They all turned their heads to look in the direction of the black courtyard of the martyr's grave. They saw a gust of wind carrying bursts of smoke and dust suddenly soar into the air like an earth dragon, twisting in the courtyard. The sound of the wind was mournful. One could even faintly hear the sharp whistling sound of the air breaking. Even from far away, one could feel the strong spiritual power rolling near the wind vent. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. Su Qingjun, who was next to him, also looked quite surprised. She said, "Someone is fighting inside?" Before her voice died away, the sound of the wind suddenly became 10 times stronger. It actually rushed directly towards the door. In an instant, sand and stones flew away. Su Qingjuan's expression changed slightly in the wind. She suddenly reached out to grab Lu Chen's arm, intending to pull him back. Who knew that her grab would actually grab empty air? She looked back in surprise and found that Lu Chen was running much faster than her. In just a short while, he had actually fled several feet away. It was no wonder that she couldn't catch Lu Chen. Su Qingjun snorted. She glared at Lu Chen in annoyance and awkwardness. She followed him and mumbled, "His cultivation is not high, but he runs fast." Lu Chen's ears were sharp, and he actually heard these words. He smiled at Su Qingjun, who was walking over, and said, "I can't help it. It's not easy to get by in this world, and I don't have the invincible talent like you geniuses. Any one of you is enough to annoy us, the janitor disciples. So, you can do anything in cultivation, but you can't slack off in escaping. You talk too much." Su Qingjun first smiled, then scolded him. On the other side, He took in the two's conversation and expressions. He seemed to be deep in thought, but his expression didn't change much. After a while, the wind gradually weakened, and the earth dragon in the air seemed to be affected by some powerful force. It twisted more and more, and then suddenly broke in the middle and fell to the ground. Then the wind stopped. A person walked out from the black courtyard, and it was Dongfang Tao. The darkness rolled and rolled behind him, and one could vaguely see another withered and skinny figure. It was the corpse watcher, but he clearly didn't have much interest in the people outside the cemetery. Since this figure had appeared, the people who seemed to have been in a fierce battle just now were naturally Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher. This discovery shocked Lu Chen and Su Qingjun. It should be known that Dongfang Tao had broken through to the Yuanying realm, and could be considered as another powerful figure in the Kunlun party. But the most surprising thing was the corpse watcher. Although he looked ugly and skinny, like a lonely old man, or like an old man who had been decaying for many years, from the situation just now, this corpse watcher must have used all kinds of strange secret techniques. Compared to a true Yuanying realm master, he did not seem to be at a disadvantage. Of course, why these two people fought, and why they suddenly stopped, was not something Lu Chen and Su Qingjun could guess. Dongfang Tao said something to the corpse watcher, and it seemed that he was a little angry. The corpse watcher also responded with a few words, and it gave off a somewhat strange feeling, which immediately made Dongfang Tao angry again. But even so, in the end, Dongfang Tao actually suppressed his anger and left the back of the dark mountain peak. On Dongfang Tao's way out, He, Su Qingjun, and Lu Chen all lowered their heads and bowed to him. Dongfang Tao did not pay much attention to these young people, and at most nodded at He as a sign of respect. Watching Dongfang Tao swagger off, Lu Chen and Su Qingjun finally reached the edge of the doorway. He was one step ahead of them, and rushed into the courtyard first. He looked at the corpse watcher and said, "Senior, look. You guys do what you need to do, don't mind me." The corpse watcher said coldly, then turned around and walked into the darkness, looking completely different from usual. He let out a long sigh, and turned to greet Su Qingjun before chatting idly. Lu Chen listened on the side, as if he did not exist. After some hypocritical pleasantries, Su Qingjun asked He, "Senior brother He, why did you call us over?" He waved his hand and said, "It's not a big deal. It's just that He Chongqing's death was very tragic, and some higher-ups in the sect couldn't stand it, so they gave the order to thoroughly investigate the matter." He paused for a moment, and his smile was a little modest, but also a little depressed, so much so that no one could tell what he was thinking in his heart. "It just so happens that the two of you were in the flowing fragrance garden that day, and were also there when the quarrel happened." Lu Chen and Su Qingjuan's faces suddenly darkened, and Su Qingjun said to He with a dark face, "Senior brother He, you called us over without any evidence. I'm afraid it's a little too much." He's expression did not change, and he said indifferently, "If the two of you have any opinions about me, you can go directly to sect leader Idle Month to complain. Once there's an order, I will naturally stop." This order would not be obtained, and Su Qingjuan's heart was as clear as a mirror. She took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, if there's anything, senior brother He, you can ask. But before that, I want to go see my good-for-nothing brother. Is that okay?" "I'm afraid that's not very convenient." He directly refused, and then said to Su Qingjun with great respect, "Su Junior sister, actually don't have to worry too much. We still have some questions to ask other than Master Su, to see if they are in cahoots with the evildoers of the evil faction." Su Qingjun snorted and said, "Anyway, you called us over, are you suspecting our identities?" "That won't be the case." He smiled and said, "Even if I suspect anyone, I won't suspect you. But what needs to be done still needs to be done. In view of the fact that there are many evil faction spies in the cultivation world, it's really hard to guard against them. I was a little rude to the two of you, please forgive me." Immediately after, He did not say any more superfluous words, and directly started to interrogate them, and in the middle of it, he even separated the two of them for a period of time. He did not ask many things, but the consecutive questions were somewhat difficult to answer, among which the most crucial one was the night He Chongqing died. Where was the person being interrogated? Originally, 3 members of the Su family were arrested, but after Su Wan and Su Qian explained where they went that day, they were released. Instead, Sumo, who had been hemming and hawing and refused to clearly state where she was that night, was directly detained. He seemed to really do what he said, and did not make things difficult for Su Qingjun, but when facing Lu Chen, he seemed to show another side. He started to interrogate Lu Chen where he was that night. Would there be anyone who could prove it? Lu Chen thought for a while, and realized that he would always be alone, unable to prove others, and unable to prove himself. He immediately became hostile and announced to Su Qingjun, "I'm going to keep this person for now and interrogate him." Su Qingjun argued with reason, and was unwilling to let Lu Chen stay, but He refused to let him go, and only said that he would not harm Lu Chen, but he really wanted to interrogate him. Until now, Sumo had not finished asking, so she did not let him go. Of course, Lu Chen was also unwilling to stay, but seeing that He was determined, he gave Su Qingjun a look, signaling her to calm down. With the advice from her master, Masato Kahara, Su Qingjun knew the vast and profound background behind this matter, and naturally felt a bit of respect. And Lu Chen was often away. Who would really care about this? And the real reason why Lu Chen agreed to stay was actually because he was curious about this grave, the mysterious corpse watcher, and those dead people. He brought everyone to this gloomy grave for interrogation, and whether there were other hidden motives. Lu Chen suddenly wanted to see the face of the person who had been caught and refused to let go. In the end, the two of them came together, but left alone. This scene made Su Qingjun feel a bit uncomfortable, and the gaze she stared at He was particularly unfriendly. He smiled bitterly, and did not explain much, and sent Su Qingjun away. In fact, if it was possible, he also wanted Su Qingjun to stay, but in this way, most people on Taiji's side would speak up, and the Su family would be completely enraged, and they might do anything. That kind of chaos was not what He wanted, nor was it what Immortal Idle Month and his master, Dukan Zhenren, wanted. Lu Chen was brought to a dark room. In this gloomy place, because of this place's special purpose, even the room looked particularly scary. According to He was tired today, and asked Lu Chen to rest first and talk tomorrow. Lu Chen did not refute, and silently accepted He's words. Until he was in this dark room, and when he began to try to see and explore the surroundings, he suddenly heard a weak and painful voice from the corner of the room, containing fear. "Save me, save me, save me!" Lu Chen immediately stopped and turned to look at the place where the voice came from. After a moment, he suddenly walked a few steps in that direction and came to a corner. Then, he squatted down and looked at the figure who was huddled up in the corner. He sighed and said, "Young Master Su, how are you?" Chapter 193. To tell the truth, Lu Chen did not expect that he would be able to see Sumo so quickly and smoothly. Originally he thought that Sumo, as the only suspect and detained suspect, would at least be locked up in some secret place and strictly guarded. Who knew that he would actually appear to be somewhat careless and directly lock the two of them together. This action was not normal, or it should be said that it was not normal at all. Whether Sumo was the evil sect spy or not had not been determined. Casually locked up with other people, wouldn't it be dangerous? Also, that day when Su Qingjun returned to the Su family and made a big fuss, Lu Chen was tormented and seriously injured by Sumo and the rest. These things were not difficult to find out. Lu Chen did not believe that a scheming person like He would not know about it. And now that he was locked up with Sumo, there seemed to be some meaning in it. These thoughts flashed through Lu Chen's mind like a spark, but there was not much change in his expression. Only looking at the man who was hiding in the corner in the dark room and moaning for help, he could vaguely see that he was the once arrogant Sumo. Lu Chen greeted Sumo, but Sumo did not respond to him. Her mouth was still muttering those two simple words. Lu Chen frowned, squatted down in front of him and saw clearly that Sumo had shrunk into a ball, buried her head on her knees, her hands behind her head, as if she was very afraid. "Save me! Save me! Sister, save me!" Sumo was still speaking intermittently in a low voice. Her voice seemed to be trembling. Instead she did not respond to Lu Chen, who was very close at hand. Lu Chen reached out and gently patted Sumo's shoulder. Sumo's body shrank a little, but it seemed to be an instinctive reaction. There was no other movement. This situation seemed a little strange and strange. Lu Chen stared at Sumo and did not speak. He fell into deep thought. After a while, he suddenly stood up and looked around. This was a dark room. Most of the rooms in the martyr's tomb were like this. Because it was too dark, it was sometimes hard to tell how big the room was. And in this room, there was a place where the darkness was especially thick, right against the wall of the room. Lu Chen stared at the thick darkness, then looked at his surroundings. After a while, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled up. He sneered, and there seemed to be a hint of ridicule in his smile. By the time Su Qingjun returned to Flying Goose Terrace alone, the sky had already darkened. She was in a bad mood. All kinds of dark and strange scenes kept appearing in front of her eyes. She was a little worried, even more worried than before. She was worried about her brother, Sumo, and also worried about Lu Chen. As she walked on the mountain path, Su Qingjun made up her mind to go to the gloomy martyr's tomb again tomorrow morning. No matter what, she had to try her best to save them. Although there might be all kinds of inexplicable undercurrents behind this matter, it had nothing to do with Sumo and Lu Chen. When she walked up to Flying Goose Terrace, her body suddenly paused. In the cold night, she saw a black dog squatting alone in front of the wooden house, looking at the mountain path here. After a while, Atsu got up and slowly walked over. When it came to Su Qingjun's side, it first looked behind her. When it found that there was no one there, Atsu raised its head to look at Su Qingjun and softly barked. Su Qingjun did not have much contact with this black dog. Because Lu Chen insisted on bringing Atsu with him, she did not mind and let Atsu live on Flying Goose Terrace, and they only met a few times. But tonight, she felt that Atsu seemed to be a little different from usual, but she could not tell what was different. Perhaps it was because they had too little contact. Su Qingjun sighed and said to Atsu, "Are you waiting for Lu Chen, Atsu?" Atsu looked at her and wagged its tail. Because it was injured, it only had one eye and half of its tail left. When it wagged its tail, it looked a little funny. Looking at its one eye and the remaining scars on its face, it gave people a sense of tragedy. These two completely different feelings were strangely mixed on this black dog. Su Qingjun felt a little apologetic in her heart, but then she felt a little funny. Looking at Atsu, she did not know why, but she still felt a little uncomfortable. She softly said, "Lu Chen has been detained, he can't come back tonight. But I have already thought about it. I will go there tomorrow. No matter what they find out, as long as I can't confirm that he is the traitor, I will definitely bring him back, okay?" Atsu quietly looked at Su Qingjun. The light in its only eye was dim and uncertain. The half of its tail behind it had unknowingly stopped. Su Qingjun saw that Tu didn't respond for a long time. She didn't know if he understood her words, so she could only sigh softly. She then turned around and walked into the cave residence. She opened the stone door and walked in. The heavy stone door closed behind her, and the flying goose platform once again fell into silence. The night became colder. The black dog slowly stood up and walked to the edge of the cliff. It looked at the vast sea of clouds in silence. Its only eye lit up with a dark green light, like a crystal-clear gem, but also like the deep sea. It slowly raised its head and looked at the dark night sky. This night, the clouds were very thick, blocking the moonlight and the stars. It was as if there was only darkness left in this world. It stood there alone, the night wind getting tighter and colder. It looked up at the sky, its black fur swaying, and its dark green eyes shining. Suddenly, it raised its head and howled at the sky, at the night sky, at the dark clouds, or at the cold moon that could not be seen but must be hidden high up in the sky. A woo! The mournful howl echoed above the sea of clouds, lingering for a long time. Su Qingjun did get up early the next morning. After dressing up, she walked out of the cave, ready to go to the cemetery. When she left the flying goose platform, she glanced at the wooden house, but she did not see Atsu, so she thought that maybe the black dog was still sleeping. Su Qingjun got up very early, but on the same morning, there was someone else who got up even earlier than her. He walked through the long street of Kunwu City, which had not yet become lively. Although the street was not lively, there were already some pedestrians. The fat old ma yawned. He saw a stall selling breakfast on the side of the road ahead, so he walked over and sat down. This kind of roadside stall, of course, sold food for mortals in the secular world. There was no such thing as food made of various spiritual materials, so ordinary cultivators would not patronize this place. However, old Ma was obviously more like a mortal. He casually sat down, ordered some steaming hot breakfast and hot porridge, and ate them in big mouthfuls. His forehead was slightly sweaty, and it was only then that he seemed to heave a sigh of relief, looking a bit more comfortable. "It's so cold tonight," he said with some emotion. He then turned his head to the north and glanced at the majestic Kunlun mountain range. Even the tall city walls of Kunwu City couldn't block the rise and fall of the majestic mountain range. Old Ma pursed his lips and said to himself, "I've done what I should. You better not bother me. Let's see what you do next." He was in a daze for a while. Then he called the stall owner to pay the bill. The stall owner was an old man, so he came over to settle the bill. When he turned around to leave, he suddenly saw Old Ma's hand, so he reminded Old Ma, "Sir, your hand is bleeding." Old Ma looked down and saw some blood between the fingers of his left hand. He immediately smiled and said to the stall owner, "Ah, I didn't expect to cut my hand. Thank you, boss. I'll go bandage it later." The old man chuckled, put away the bowls and chopsticks, and walked away. Old Ma stood up and walked back to the street. As he walked, he calmly wiped his left hand under his sleeve. That trace of blood was wiped on it. Then it disappeared from his hand. He happily and contentedly walked forward, just like an ordinary person. At this time, the street gradually became lively and more people appeared. No one noticed a fat man with bloodstains on his hand gradually walked into the crowd and disappeared. He did not sleep well that night. The energy in the righteous grave was too heavy. It was really not suitable for ordinary people to live in. Even for a foundation establishment realm cultivator like him, living here for a long time would also feel uncomfortable. If one lived in this kind of shady place for a long time, perhaps even one's temperament would become strange, just like that corpse watcher. He was actually curious about the corpse watcher. This skinny and shriveled old man was mysterious and obviously powerful. He also seemed to have some unexplainable grudges with the newly promoted Yuanying Zhenren, Dongfang Tao, which made him even more unfathomable. But right now, these were not the things that he was most concerned about. He was recommended by Dukan Zhenren to sect leader Idle Month Zhenren. He was wholeheartedly pursuing that evil faction spy murder case. However, this matter had been dragged on for a long time. He was actually feeling a great deal of pressure. And because of this, he had no choice but to gradually turn his methods more intense. It was already too late to use the previous gentle and tactful methods. Teacher and sect leader Reverend, they could not continue to indulge like that. He felt wronged. This evil faction spy's methods were ruthless but unusually cautious. Even with his very familiar experience with the evil faction, after so long, he still could not find any reliable clues. But in his heart, he did not blame those two teachers. Without them, he would still be in closed-door training and reflecting on his mistakes. Without them, he would not have been able to come out and do things so early. He even felt a little ashamed and felt that he had let down his teacher and sect leader Reverend. So, today, he felt that the reason why he could not calm down last night was because he did not do a good job. Then today, he must think of a way to carefully interrogate the two people who were currently detained, and strive to find out something. If there were any results, based on this merit, he would definitely be able to let his younger brother, He Gang, return to the Kunlun party. When he thought of this, his somewhat heavy heart lightened up a lot. When he strode out of the room, he probably thought of his younger brother. The corners of his mouth carried a trace of a smile. But the moment he walked to the courtyard, he was suddenly stunned. On the grave's black main entrance, the room door was opened, but he did not know when, but there was a black dog standing outside. The black dog was staring at him. Chapter 194. Of course, he had never seen one before. Or rather, even if he had, he would not have cared about such an ordinary black dog. However, when he saw the black dog, he was still slightly shocked. He was curious as to why a dog would appear in such a shadowy place where all living creatures and creatures avoided it. He was also surprised at the mutilations and scars on the black dog's body. This was a dog that had clearly been severely injured. Not only was it covered in scars, its one eye and half a tail made it even uglier and more frightening. He was also a normal person. When he first saw the black dog, he frowned and his eyes were filled with disgust. However, very soon, He's gaze changed slightly and his expression softened. This change was not because he had suddenly become kind and compassionate, but because he had suddenly thought of his younger brother, He Gang. Because he had been surrounded by a pack of black jackals in the disorientated lands, He Gang had been severely injured and disfigured. Now, after a series of twists and turns, he did not look like a human or a ghost. As his older brother, his heart ached for him. For some reason, when he saw this black dog, he suddenly thought of He Gang and felt an inexplicable sense of compassion. So, he did not immediately chase the black dog away. Instead, he stood and watched for a while before walking over. The black dog looked at his figure in silence and did not move. It did not retreat, nor did it hide. There was a strange light flowing in its single eye as it stared at He's figure. He walked to the door and glanced at the black dog, then looked outside the door to confirm that there was no one outside. It seemed that no one had deliberately brought this dog here. However, this made it even more strange. After staying in the righteous grave for several days, He had long noticed that the Yin Qi in this place was extremely strong. It was the enemy of almost all living creatures. In this righteous grave, there was not even a mouse or a cockroach, let alone wild beasts or birds. Could it be that because this dog was black, it was not afraid of this pitch-black righteous grave? This ridiculous thought flashed through He's mind. Even he himself felt bored, but he still had a good impression of this black dog. He waved his hand at the black dog and said, "This is not a place for you. Leave quickly." As he spoke, he made a gesture to drive it away. The black dog took 2 steps back. Although it was still staring at He, perhaps because He did not show too much hostility before, and even had a little bit of gentleness to it, the black dog did not react too aggressively to He. It glanced at the courtyard of the righteous grave and seemed a little hesitant. The darkness and the strange atmosphere inside made it very uncomfortable and it did not want to go in. So, after a moment of hesitation, the black dog retreated more than 10 feet away and found a large tree to lie down, as if it was waiting for something. He glanced over there and shook his head. He was too lazy to care about it. He couldn't even take care of the person, so who would have the time to care about the dog? He turned and walked into the depths of the courtyard. The door to the room where Sumo and Lu Chen, who had just arrived yesterday, was still locked. In the darkness on the other side, the corpse walked out of the shadows like a ghost. He nodded at him and looked at the tightly shut door again. There was a hint of worry on his face as he asked the corpse, "Senior, will they be all right?" The corpse's face was haggard and his expression seemed to always be as rigid as ever. After hearing He's question, he only replied faintly, "They won't die." He shook his head and seemed to smile bitterly. He then sighed and asked, "Did you find anything?" The corpse replied, Under the influence of the mind-manipulating spell, their souls were agitated and injured, causing them to fall into a terrifying illusion. Their words are definitely true, so it shouldn't be them. He was silent. Seeing that the corpse ignored him, he casually waved in the direction of the door. A cold wind suddenly rose and swept across the courtyard. The door on the other side suddenly opened with a squeak. He frowned and walked into the room. After a while, he dragged two people out, one in each hand, and placed them on the ground. The two people were, of course, Sumo and Lu Chen. Between the two, Lu Chen's face was ashen and his eyes were lifeless. He sat on the ground with a blank gaze, unable to even focus on He and the corpse. Occasionally, he would mutter a few words in a low voice, but it was unclear what he was saying. As for Sumo, his condition was even worse than Lu Chen. Probably because he had stayed here for a longer period of time. His entire person looked like an idiot, drooling and his eyes slanted. He looked completely different from that young master from before. He took a glance at Lu Chen and then most of his attention was still on Sumo. After watching for a long while, he suddenly stood up and said to the corpse, "Senior, this time many thanks for your help. But I think this matter should end here. As for how to track the evil people, I will think of a way myself." The corpse's expression did not change. He only glanced at him and coldly said, "I owe you a little favor, that's why I helped you. Since you don't need it, naturally I won't care anymore." He sighed and said, "The main thing is that Senior's mind-manipulating spell is really too overbearing. I'm afraid if this goes on, these two people's minds will be completely destroyed. That odd job disciple doesn't matter, but Sumo is after all a person with a family background. It's not good to mess around." "As you wish. But remember, after this time, don't come and bother me again," the corpse said indifferently. Then he turned around and walked into the depths of the courtyard. Before he left, his ghost claw-like palm waved at Sumo and Lu Chen. A few rays of gray light floated up from their bodies and followed him into the darkness. Sumo and Lu Chen's bodies suddenly shook. A moment later, their heads tilted and they both fainted on the ground. He walked over to take their pulse. He felt that these two people's pulse had gradually calmed down. He nodded his head in relief. After all, the Kunlun party was a place with rules. It did not allow him to act recklessly. If he really wrongly accused a good person and killed someone, even his master and the sect leader might not be able to protect him. After the mind-manipulating spell was lifted, between Sumo and Lu Chen did not seem to have changed much. On the other hand, Sumo's complexion was much better. At least the idiotic look of her crooked mouth and slanted eyes was gone. Her facial expression gradually returned to normal, but she still did not look too good. After about an hour, He suddenly heard a call from the entrance of the martyr's tomb. "Senior brother He." He turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing at the doorstep with a solemn expression. She was looking in his direction. Then, her gaze fell on the two people lying on the ground. She immediately looked surprised and worried. He cupped his hands at her and said, "Good morning, junior sister Su." Su Qingjun walked over slowly. She seemed to still be suppressing her emotions to keep calm. She said, "What happened to them?" He said, "They were just released to get some fresh air." Su Qingjun's expression turned cold. She said, "What did you do to them?" He shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything. But I have already asked what I needed to ask. The two of them should have nothing to do with He Chongqing's death. So when they wake up later, you can take them back." Su Qingjun was startled. Then, her face revealed a happy expression. At this moment, there was a sudden groan from the ground. Lu Chen was the first to wake up. Not long after, Sumo also woke up. He looked around blankly. His eyes were still a little scattered. After a while, he seemed to suddenly find Su Qingjun. His expression suddenly changed. He rushed over and hugged Su Qingjun. He shouted, "Sister, sister!" Su Qingjun showed a pained expression. She reached out and patted his back to comfort him. At the same time, she looked at Lu Chen. She found that although Lu Chen's expression was a little strange, he could still control himself. He stood up shakily. Their eyes met. Lu Chen grinned, indicating that he was fine. Su Qingjun took a deep breath. She looked at He and said coldly, "Senior brother He, since you are fine, can we go?" He nodded and said, Forgive me for not seeing you off. Su Qingjun supported Sumo. Lu Chen also looked a little weak, but he still walked alone. When they walked out of the gate of the martyr's grave, a black shadow suddenly walked out from a corner in front of them. The black dog stood quietly on the side of the road. It did not look at Su Qingjun and Sumo. It only looked at Lu Chen. Then, it gently wagged its tail and walked towards Lu Chen. When Lu Chen saw Atsu, his expression changed slightly. He then glanced at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, I didn't bring it here. I don't know how Atsu came here by itself. After a moment of silence, Lu Chen nodded and said, I know. You can go first. I'll go back to the Flying Goose Terrace later. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment. But Sumo's situation was indeed worse. She also had to send him back to the Su family in Kunwu City as soon as possible, so she couldn't care about Lu Chen now. So in the end she softly said, I'll take Sumo back. After I settle him down, I'll come back to see you as soon as possible. Lu Chen smiled and said, I'm fine. Don't worry. Su Qingjun responded and supported Sumo as they left. In the martyr's grave, the aura of darkness seemed to be everywhere, lingering around him and Atsu. Lu Chen squatted in front of Atsu and looked at Atsu. Atsu's only eye was also looking at him. He didn't know why, but he felt that the light in Atsu's eyes was somewhat different from before. But he didn't care. He just smiled and stroked Atsu's head, saying, You've become smarter, stupid dog. Atsu silently shook its head. Lu Chen stood up and said to it, Let's go home. The man and the dog walked outside. Just as they were about to walk out of the darkness, an anxious figure suddenly ran over from a distance. His face was filled with anger and anxiety. He rushed past them and ran into the depths of the darkness. Lu Chen's footsteps paused, and he turned around to look at that person's back. Then, he expressionlessly turned around and continued to walk out, stepping into the warm light. Chapter 195. The bustling streets of Kunwu City were filled with people coming and going as usual. It was as peaceful and prosperous as if all living things were happy. In the distance, Kunlun Mountain was lofty and majestic. The sun was warm on Fian Platform. Lu Chen was lying on the bed of his wooden house, quietly looking at the scenery outside the window. Far away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the small courtyard of the Black Hill Pavilion, old Ma was sitting there. He had changed his clothes, carried a basin of water, and was carefully washing his hands. The blood stains made the water a little red. He looked at the red color with a strange expression. He stretched out a finger and gently drew a few strokes on the reddish spots in the water. It seemed like he was stirring randomly, but it also seemed like he was writing a word. Faint traces of blood gently circled around his fingertips, floating and dispersing in the water, so that the word couldn't take shape. Soon, even the blood itself disappeared. Old Ma raised his head and looked at the sky. After a moment of silence, he pulled a piece of cloth from the side and carefully wiped his palm clean, not leaving the slightest trace. The morning wind blew through Kunwu City, bringing with it a slight chill. A group of people gathered outside the gate of a certain house. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. It was coming from that house. The crowd of onlookers looked a little excited, as if they had lived ordinary lives for too long and finally had a lively scene to watch. However, from beginning to end, no one tried to enter the courtyard. Who was a fool these days? Being wise to stay out of trouble was the right thing to do. Later, a figure suddenly flew over from afar and rushed into the house like an arrow leaving the bow. Because his speed was so fast, there was even a sharp whistling sound as he broke through the air, making people unable to clearly see his figure and face. Immediately after, several figures rushed over and landed at the gate of the house. The difference was that they all clearly appeared in front of the crowd. The crowd of onlookers suddenly became restless because the people standing guard in front of the gate were cultivators wearing the uniform of Kunlun party disciples. The person who rushed in the front with the fastest speed was He. The place he rushed into was the residence of his younger brother, He Gang, several times before. When he received the news and rushed here, when he smelled the faint smell of blood, his heart slowly sank until he rushed into the courtyard and saw the bloody scene. He Gang was lying on the ground in the middle of the courtyard, already dead. There was also a blood stain on his side, from his bedroom to the place where he died. It seemed that he had struggled to crawl from there. He had lost a lot of blood, so his skin looked a little pale, which made his already disfigured face look even more terrifying. He Gang's eyes were still wide open, as if he had died with a grievance, but no one knew what he had seen before he died. He stood there stiffly, looking at the corpse on the ground in a daze. Just a few days ago, he was still sitting together with him, looking forward to the beautiful days in the future, and even exaggeratedly thinking about what kind of good sister-in-law he should find for his brother in the future. Sometimes, he really thought that he and his younger brother could live well like this, that he would become successful and famous, that he would be successful in his cultivation, and that he would take good care of him for the rest of his life. The past flashed past his mind like scenes, from the lonely childhood, the brothers who depended on each other for survival, to supporting each other for so many years, from when he was young to now, from when he was young to when he was mature. The only thing that never changed was his smile, Big Brother. At this moment, like a death knell, the sound of Big Brother rang again and again in his ears. He only felt that his heart was beating crazily, as if it was about to explode. He thought that he was going crazy, shouting and yelling, but in the end, he could not make a sound. He just staggered forward, and then knelt down beside his younger brother's corpse. The smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. He suddenly felt like vomiting. His hand trembled a little, and he slowly reached over and gently touched Gang's head. His younger brother's head shook slightly, but there was no reaction. Where he touched it, his fingertips felt a trace of coldness that seemed to seep into his bones. He clenched his teeth, his mouth silently contorting for a moment. Then he lowered his head, his entire body tensed up and trembled. He forcefully swallowed all the anger and pain. He's dead, he's dead, he's dead. There was a bitter smile on his face, but there were no tears, only desolation. Then, he gently used his hand to wipe his younger brother's eyes, wanting him to at least rest in peace, but after trying a few times, he found that the eyes could not close. He slowly retracted his hand. "All right," he said softly, "just open your eyes. Big Brother promises you, I will help you get revenge." Gang's face did not change. The matter of having a spirit after death seemed to be just a legend after all. He lowered his head, and was silent for a very long time. Then, he quietly began to help his younger brother tidy up his body, smoothing his clothes and straightening his body. Then, he found that Gang had a hand under his body. He tried to pull his hand out, but when he flipped over Gang's body halfway, his body suddenly trembled, and his movements abruptly stopped. After a moment, he relaxed his movements, lightly pulling Gang's body to the side, revealing the piece of ground he was originally pressing down on. One of Gang's hands was still there, his finger stained with dark red blood, using blood to write a crooked and terrifying character on the ground. Su! That crooked character was like a sharp blade that was stabbed into his chest, that dripping blood, imprinted in his eyes like a burning scarlet flame. He stared at that character, the muscles at the corners of his eyes twitching slightly. At this time, the sound of footsteps came from behind him. It was the junior brothers that he brought with him walking in. He seemed to want to say something, but he quickly closed his mouth. A trace of a desolate smile appeared at the corners of his mouth, and then it quickly disappeared. His face became gloomy, and in the end, indifferent. He stood up, and with a step, he stepped on that character. The several Kunlun disciples next to him walked over. When they saw the bloody scene, they all had frightened, angry, and unbearable expressions on their faces. One after another, they came up to comfort He slowly nodded, and without saying anything else, he only said in a soft voice, "Thank you, junior brothers, for helping me." As he said this, he slowly walked forward, but as he lifted his foot, there seemed to be an infinitely heavy pressure on his shoulder. When he took a step forward, a dazzling trail of blood appeared under his foot, and it was a bloody mess. Some people helped him to the side to rest, while others sighed and prepared to clean up the mess. In the middle of it all, they glanced at the ground. In the middle of it, there was nothing but fresh blood on the ground. Only when the sun shone down, it illuminated the bloody and tragic shadow. There were still 13 days until the next full moon night. There was some turmoil in the Kunlun party, and it was about He. His only relative, his younger brother Gang, was suddenly killed in Kunwu City, and his body was thrown in the courtyard. When the news came, He was so grieved that he almost couldn't do anything, so the murder case of Chongqing, which caused a lot of trouble, suddenly quieted down. Dukan Junren, who cherished his disciple, once again summoned He back in the name of closed-door meditation. He went to the sect master, Reverend Idle Month, to ask for forgiveness, and took all the responsibility. But Reverend Idle Month was also open-minded and didn't really pursue the matter. In any case, they were all from the same sect. If someone was to blame, they could only blame the devil cult's evil man for being too treacherous and cunning. It was just that in the sect, everyone seemed to hate the devil cult to the bone and felt indignant about the injustice. But in private, there were some whispers that couldn't be brought to the surface. He Gang didn't die earlier or later, but he died when he was investigating the murder case on a large scale, and he died after he detained the Su family? The water was deep. Many people said so, with a meaningful smile on their faces. The Su family, on the other hand, remained silent. Originally, when they brought Sumo back, they were indignant and wanted to fight back and take revenge. But suddenly, overnight, all the Su family were directly locked up at home by Su Tianhe, and were not allowed to go out easily. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party was a little strange, but in any case, things that didn't come out publicly, everyone could pretend that it didn't happen. Life still had to go on. When the moon at night began to slowly become full from the smallest crescent, Lu Chen also went out several times in the middle of the night, hoping to encounter the strange three-eyed bug again, but he didn't find anything. That night really seemed like a dream. Everything seemed to be the same as before, nothing had changed. Until one night, he suddenly saw Atsu lying on the windowsill, suddenly raised his head, and howled at the dark sky, and heard that mournful long cry. Lu Chen suddenly sat up. After the long cry, Atsu turned to look at him, and suddenly jumped out of the window. Without any hesitation, Lu Chen directly jumped out, and then followed Atsu, all the way to the forest behind the mountain of Flying Goose Terrace. The dark forest emitted a deep darkness under the night sky, and the old and sturdy trees were like tall giants, but Atsu didn't seem to have any fear, and directly ran into the forest. Lu Chen followed, ran all the way, and gradually came to the depths of the forest. Then somewhere, Atsu suddenly stopped, and Lu Chen also slowed down and stood beside it. He first looked at it, and then looked around. It was a little dark, but he could see the shadow of a big stone in front of him, and there seemed to be some things around it. Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. He took a few steps forward, and then gradually saw the things there. Beside the stone, there were many corpses of birds and small animals. All of them were bitten to death. He suddenly turned back and stared at Atsu, only to see that in the darkness, the dim light in Atsu's eyes gradually lit up, and gradually became brighter. Like a dark green flame. Chapter 196. Lu Chen's eyes met Atsu's. In this quiet night, in this dark forest, there was a night wind blowing above the trees, and there was a slight rustling sound of the branches and leaves swaying. There was also a glimmer of light, like a green flame, much brighter than the eyes he had seen in the past. There was not much smell of blood around. Even if there were many corpses of birds and beasts, perhaps the blood had dried up after a long time. There was a low gasp from Atsu's mouth, as if it was hiding a trace of pain. Its eyes began to change, with a hint of madness, as if at this moment, there were suddenly two thoughts suddenly colliding in its mind, tearing at each other crazily. The green light also became unstable, sometimes bright, sometimes weak, like a candle flame swaying in the wind. Lu Chen looked at it quietly, his face cold, and there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. But this night, Atsu seemed to be really different from before. It was struggling, fluctuating between quiet and violent emotions, and the darkness around it gradually became turbulent, surging wave by wave. In the quiet forest, it seemed that even the sound of a needle falling on the ground could be heard. No one would have thought that in this quiet night, they would suddenly confront each other here. The darkness gradually gathered into a tide, and wave after wave washed over. The green flame in Atsu's eyes became brighter and brighter, as if it was going to explode in the next moment. The mountain forest seemed to be silent. All the creatures were holding their breaths and even the trees were cowering. Only in the depths of the darkness, in a ghostly place, there seemed to be a demonic gaze staring at this place, revealing a look of excitement. Suddenly, Lu Chen suddenly turned around, and without any warning, rushed into the darkness on the other side of the forest. Atsu, who was squatting and growling in a low voice, suddenly raised its head, and the green light in its eyes flickered, as if it was a little shocked at this moment. In the darkness, it was as silent as the sea, but after a moment, the darkness suddenly burst like a raging wave, and suddenly scattered. Low roars and sharp whistles mixed together, and all kinds of strange sounds with a creepy aura burst out. Even Atsu subconsciously took 2 steps back, and at the same time, it seemed that its attention was diverted, and the green flame in its eyes slowly dimmed. Bang! Someone groaned in pain in the darkness. 2 figures were thrown out together. But they did not separate in midair. Instead, they were still fighting, and the various moves they used were all extremely vicious and merciless. Every move was fatal, and every move was bloody. The figures descended from the sky. One of them was Lu Chen. At this moment, black light flashed in his eyes, and his aura was completely unleashed. It was filled with a chilling killing intent. The normally harmless errand disciple was nowhere to be found. Right now, he was clearly a cold-blooded killer. And opposite him was a petite figure, who clearly had an unearthly beautiful face, but the ruthlessness of her attacks was like the most terrible evil spirit. It was White Lotus. The battle between these 2 people was practically a repeat of the last time. They didn't possess any of the dignity and grace of cultivators, and all they utilized were ruthless, sinister, and ferocious methods. They stopped at nothing for the sake of killing each other as soon as possible. Blood instantly flew, and drops of blood stained the white and beautiful face of White Lotus, like the red dew on the beautiful flower petals in the morning, and it was shocking. When she fell, she had already scratched Lu Chen's chest, and her white fingertips instantly whistled up with wind and snow, and in just a moment, she had already pierced Lu Chen's chest. However, the wind and snow only stopped here, because almost at the same time, a hand rushed out from the darkness like an evil spirit, and had already grabbed White Lotus's slender neck. Lu Chen was like a roaring evil spirit, wildly rushing up, and White Lotus moaned in pain. Her fingers trembled, and the ice and snow exploded on Lu Chen's chest, and the countless fragments of ice crystals all turned the color of blood. Lu Chen let out a low roar, and his face twisted, as if his whole body had fallen into an ice cellar. But at this moment, it seemed that all the blood in his body was cold, and he was isolated from all the pain, ignoring it. Those 5 terrible fingers flickered with black flames, and in an instant, they burned into White Lotus's flesh and blood. White Lotus screamed, and her whole body was grabbed by the neck by Lu Chen, and with a loud bang, her body heavily hit the trunk of a large tree. Suddenly, the surroundings trembled, and countless leaves fell like rain. The murderous rain in the darkness. It was as if the air had suddenly quieted down, and all the noise had died down. Gradually, the sound of falling leaves could be heard, as well as Lu Chen's slightly pained panting, and White Lotus's already twisted breathing. The green light in Atsu's eyes had almost completely disappeared, and it seemed to be stunned by the sudden scene just now. Only now did it react, and then it hesitantly stood up, and slowly walked a few steps towards Lu Chen and White Lotus. As it got closer, it could clearly see that in the still falling leaves, Lu Chen slightly lowered his head, as if he was sucking in cold air, and coughed softly. His chest was a mess, and his right hand was straight in front of him. He still grabbed White Lotus's neck, and pushed her against the tree trunk, so that her petite body was suspended in the air, and her face was pale, as if she was about to suffocate to death. In the forest, there was only silence. Atsu looked at the 2 strange people, and hesitantly took a step forward. Suddenly, Lu Chen turned his head and looked at it. His empty left hand suddenly raised, and he pointed a finger at it. He pointed at it condescendingly. Along with this movement, a few scalp-numbing cracking sounds came from his body, like the sound of ice cracking. Then, a gush of blood gushed out from his chest. Atsu immediately stopped in his tracks. It looked up at Lu Chen, and that finger was just above it. Deep in the man's eyes, there seemed to be wild black flames burning, and endless black tides swept over. He stood in the darkness, like a god or a devil. All the hair on Atsu's body seemed to stand up in an instant. After a moment, it lowered its head, and slowly lay down under that finger, showing all its submission and awe. Lu Chen took a deep look at the black dog, then turned his head, and looked at White Lotus in front of him. His eyes were as violent as a demon, and as cold as the ice on his chest. He stared at this fairy-like little girl, and after a moment, he said coldly, "Is it fun?" White Lotus was suspended in the air under that hand that seemed to be cast from iron. Her face was in pain, but for some reason, she was still smiling when she looked at Lu Chen's face while panting. "It's fun," she said, looking straight at Lu Chen, and there seemed to be a hint of provocation in the depths of her eyes. Lu Chen's 5 fingers tightened again, and White Lotus groaned in pain. Her suspended body twisted a little, like a thirsty fish thrown onto the shore. You are forcing me to kill you, Lu Chen said coldly. You don't dare to kill me. Almost immediately after his words, White Lotus immediately responded. Then her legs kicked a few more times, as if she was finally unable to breathe, and her body began to soften. Lu Chen silently looked at this strange girl who seemed to be a mix of light and darkness, beautiful and fierce angel and demon. After a while, he suddenly let go of his hand. White Lotus let out a soft cry, and her whole body fell down. After falling to the ground, she covered her neck with both hands, and began to desperately gasp for breath. After a while, she finally calmed down. Lu Chen looked at her quietly, then sighed, and said, You are right, I don't dare to kill you. The darkness in the forest at this time had gradually calmed down, no longer surging like the tide, nor was there that kind of fierceness. Instead, there was a hint of quiet gentleness. Lu Chen walked to the side of Atsu, and very naturally sat down on the ground next to it. At this moment, all the different aura on his body had disappeared, and he seemed to have changed back to the usual gentle and useless odd-job disciple. However, Atsu seemed to be more familiar with Lu Chen's aura. It gently leaned over, using its head to rub against Lu Chen's thigh, and then nestled beside him, just like before, intimately, as if nothing had happened. On the other side, White Lotus also walked over after resting for a while. After that life and death battle, she seemed to suddenly forget everything, just like Atsu, as if nothing had happened, and naturally sat opposite Lu Chen and Atsu. The atmosphere was a little vaguely strange. Lu Chen raised his head to look at her and said, I thought we had already made it clear before. White Lotus said, What do you mean? Lu Chen said, Well, water does not interfere with the river water. As long as we stay away from each other, we will be safe. White Lotus thought for a moment, and said, I originally thought so, until I saw Atsu again. Atsu raised its head to look at her from Lu Chen's side. Lu Chen stretched out his hand to press its head, and touched the fur on its head and said, White Lotus stared at him, as if trying to find some clues from Lu Chen's face, and said, This dog has the aura of the blood food secret method. Lu Chen shook his head and flatly said, There is no such thing. White Lotus sneered, You think you can dismiss me with this sentence, I will not be wrong. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and suddenly said, Don't forget that the world is big, and there is not only one blood food secret method, there may be other magical powers that you don't know. And even if it is the blood food secret method, it is not unique to you. On what basis do you make wild guesses? White Lotus said, Of course I know this. In fact, even if this dog really has the blood food secret method, it doesn't matter to me. But the most important thing is that this dog did not go crazy or die after being used the blood food secret method. She sneered and looked at Lu Chen and said, Don't tell me you don't know what this means? Lu Chen gently touched Atsu's head, but fell silent, and did not say a word for a long time. Chapter 197. In the end, nothing happened that night. Lu Chen and White Lotus parted ways in the dark forest. They went their own ways and went their separate ways. When the beautiful girl disappeared into the forest like a ghost, Lu Chen brought Atsu to Flying Goose platform and returned to his wooden house. Late at night, the clouds parted and the moon appeared. A faint ray of moonlight shone on the windowsill and shone on Lu Chen and Atsu. Atsu looked up at the sky. The crescent moon was like a hook, while Lu Chen stared at Atsu. After a while, he stretched out his hand and gently touched Atsu's back. Atsu turned its head and glanced at him. Lu Chen frowned slightly. After a while he suddenly said, You can't stay on this Kunlun mountain anymore. Atsu's only eye flickered. Lu Chen's hand gently stroked Atsu's body. Its fur was soft and smooth like black satin. However, under this smoothness, there were pieces of bulging flesh and bones. There was blood that flowed extremely fast, and there was the sound of a strong beating heart. It was an unfamiliar power that was slowly gathering in this black dog's body. One day in the future, it would finally burst out. I didn't expect you to become like this. Lu Chen gently touched Atsu and whispered, I just wanted to save your life at that time, but there was really no other way. White Lotus, that little girl, always thought that what you had was the blood-feeding secret method. In fact, that was not the case at all. What I used that day was the devil cult's reincarnation formation, and the blood soul crystal fragments that I condensed with my evil method. At that time, I only thought of prolonging your life. But I didn't expect that you could actually absorb the blood soul crystal fragments and activate all the potential of your bloodline. This result is almost exactly the same as the blood-feeding secret art, so she's mistaken. Lu Chen smiled and said, Atsu, I think your father, whom you have never met, must be an extremely powerful demonic beast. That's why he could give you such a strong bloodline. Atsu leaned forward. It wasn't clear if it understood Lu Chen's words, but it didn't say a word from beginning to end. Lu Chen didn't mind. He raised his head and looked out the window, looking at the moon high up in the sky. After a while he said softly, You can only stay for another 10 days at most. When the night of the full moon arrives, you won't be able to endure it anymore. Before that you must go down the mountain. The next morning, the sky was bright. When Lu Chen walked out of the wooden house, he saw Xian's figure walking quickly from the foot of the mountain. Although she told Lu Chen that she would come back to see him as soon as possible, but in fact, these days, Su Qingjun hadn't come back. As for the reason, Lu Chen actually knew very well that Sumo's situation was actually far worse than when she came out of the martyr's grave that day. Mind-manipulating spell was a very overbearing spell, but it couldn't be said to be evil or evil. In fact, similar methods existed in both the righteous faction and the devil cult. But firstly, it was very difficult to practice, and secondly, it was very easy to backfire on oneself. So there weren't many people who practiced it. Needless to say, there were many madmen in the devil cult. As for the righteous faction, there were also people who practiced similar spells, but almost all of them were in Fuyunji under Zheng Xianmeng's command. After all, this kind of spell was almost of no help to the cultivator's own cultivation and strength, but the danger was not small. Most of the time, it could only be used as a means of interrogation. Lu Chen didn't know much about the other halls of Zheng Xianmeng, but he knew Fuyunji like the back of his hand. That day, he saw that Sumo was cast with an extremely overbearing mind-manipulating spell, and her mind was damaged. Moreover, the person who cast the spell was very ruthless and ruthless. It seemed that in order to get what he knew, he didn't care about Sumo's life at all. At that time, Lu Chen felt a little strange. He felt that he didn't seem to go so far, otherwise, he would directly fall out with the Su family. With the Su family's current reputation and Su Qingjuan's advancement to Jin Dan, doing so would directly become a life-and-death enemy, which was really stupid. Until later, he saw the person who looked at the corpse. For a moment, he almost thought that the person who looked at the corpse was a spy sent by Zheng Xianmeng Fuyunji to the Kunlun party. Compared to the various things around Lu Chen these days, whether it was people or things, all seemed to be hazy and gloomy. Only Xian that he saw this morning was bright. She bathed in the bright morning light, walking briskly. When she saw Lu Chen standing on the Fian platform, she suddenly laughed, then waved her hand vigorously, and ran over to him. The sunlight shone on her face, reflecting an unusually bright brilliance. The fresh mountain wind also seemed to follow her, swirling and dancing, blowing over this mountain peak. Brother Lu! Xian called out to him with a smile. Lu Chen nodded to her, revealing a trace of a smile, and said, Why are you here? Oh, Sister Su sent someone to pass a message, asking me to come and see you, said Xian with a smile. Lu Chen slightly raised his eyebrows, and said, What happened to her, asking you to pass a message for her? Xian sighed, showing a trace of helplessness on her face, and said to Lu Chen, Sister Su has something to do at home, she really can't leave, but I heard from her that you seem to be injured, and she is also a little worried, so she asked me to come and see you. Sister Su also said that if you feel that your injury is really serious, let me take you to Bai Chao Tang first to have a look, and don't worry about anything. In the future, when she returns to the mountain, she will naturally return this favor. Lu Chen smiled, and said, She is a careful woman. Xian said with a smile, That's right, Sister Su is a good person. I say, Brother Lu, you are really lucky. If it were someone else, it would be impossible for them to treat a part-time disciple like this. Lu Chen glanced at her, and suddenly asked with a smile, What about you? Lu Chen asked, If you also encountered the same situation, would you be concerned about an ordinary part-time disciple like her? Xian frowned her beautiful eyebrows, seeming to be a little distressed and hesitant, and after a moment of hesitation she stammered, Well, me probably not. Lu Chen laughed out loud and pointed at Xian saying, You are a bad woman. Hey! Xian suddenly became a little angry, and glared at Lu Chen, shouting, Why do you ask me these things for no reason? Well, most people don't care about a part-time disciple they are not close to, okay? Lu Chen shrugged and said, It's over. It seems that if something really happens to me in the future, I can't count on you. Xian's cheeks blushed, but she shook her head and said, That won't happen, Brother Lu. You are different from others. I will definitely take care of you. Lu Chen was a little surprised, and looked at Xian, and said with a smile, Really? Xian nodded and said, Really? You are alone. If you are really beaten to death, won't it be very miserable? And you used to be very good to me. In the future when I have the ability, I will definitely take care of you, don't worry. Lu Chen saw that she was particularly serious, and only felt that it was interesting, and his heart was inexplicably touched. But soon he still smiled and interrupted and said, Okay, then from today on, I will say that you are a good woman. Xian looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and joy, then looked around and asked, Where's Atu? Lu Chen turned back and whistled. After a while, a black shadow sprang out from the mountain forest behind Flying Goose Terrace, and it was Black Dog. Seeing Xian standing beside Lu Chen from afar, Atsu immediately shook its head and wagged its tail, and quickly ran over. Xian also let out a crisp laughter, and greeted it with a chuckle. On the way she hugged Atsu who was rushing over, and hugged it in her arms. Woof, 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 woof. Atsu barked repeatedly, looking very excited and happy, probably because it had not seen Xian for a while. On this mountain of Kunlun, the people who could really make it feel close to, and the people who could completely let down its guard, were only Lu Chen and Xian in front of it. Xian was also very happy. She hugged Atsu, and then pressed her hands hard on its back and head, as if she wanted to double what she had not seen in these days. She laughed, and suddenly screamed. It turned out that Atsu was too excited, and kept jumping, and accidentally crushed Xian. Xian patted Atu's head. Although Atu's current appearance was extremely ferocious and hideous, in her eyes, he was no different from the black puppy from back then. She even laughed and shouted, Oh, stinky Atsu, why are you so heavy now? How many kilograms have you gained? Woof 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 woof. Atsu kept rubbing against her, and its tail was also wagging wildly, as if it was venting the joy in its heart. After a while, the person and the dog calmed down a little. Xian smiled and patted Atsu's head, then turned to Lu Chen and said with a smile, Brother Lu, do you think Atsu has grown a lot? Grown up? Lu Chen was a little surprised, but after hearing what she said, he took a closer look and really felt that Atsu seemed to have grown a lot. Then he seemed to think of something, and his face became slightly solemn, but soon returned to normal. He smiled and said, It should be. This stupid dog doesn't know anything. It only thinks about eating. After a while, Xian finally came over and said to Lu Chen, Brother Lu, are you really okay now? Lu Chen said, Yes, I'm fine. Don't worry. Oh, I'll tell Sister Sue about it. Xian said with a smile. Lu Chen looked at Xian and suddenly thought of something else. Back in the dark grave, Xian's master, Dongfeng Tao, suddenly appeared there, and seemed to have a fierce fight with the mysterious corpse watcher. His eyes flickered slightly, and he asked Xian, Oh right, you always ask me, how have you been recently? Xian said, Pretty good. Lu Chen smiled and said, What about your master? Did he teach you any amazing skills recently? Not yet. Xian looked a little depressed, and said, Master said that I need to build a solid foundation, and then practice higher-level magic arts. Oh right, he also said that he will take me to a mysterious place soon, to broaden my horizons. Lu Chen's body suddenly shook, and his eyes instantly lit up. Chapter 198. Oh, where are you going? Lu Chen asked Xian. Xian shook her head and said, Master didn't say. He only said that I've never been there before. I also want to know, but I've asked Master several times, but he just smiled and didn't say anything. Lu Chen lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then his gaze slowly softened, and he smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly. He thought that he had been a shadow for a long time, and stayed in the dark for a long time. It seemed that his whole person had become a little strange. Dongfeng Tao had just casually said a few words to his female disciple. Perhaps he really wanted to take Xian to broaden her horizons, but when he heard it, He felt that there was something wrong. Maybe I'm black-hearted. Lu Chen muttered in a low voice. Xin, who was next to him, didn't hear it clearly. She asked curiously, "Brother Lu, what did you say?" Lu Chen shook his head and said with a smile, "Nothing. That's right, this Kunlun mountain range is so big. Perhaps there are many magical and magnificent paradises that we haven't heard of. Not to mention other things. Just the 4 strange peaks floating in the sky are rare in the world. If we can go up and take a look, it will also be a kind of blessing." Xin laughed and said, "Brother Lu, you're right. But I think it's most likely impossible between the clouds and the sky. Our sect has long had a rule that only Yuanying Zhenren can set foot on the 4 strange peaks of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I'm still far from that." Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved. He asked Xin, "Speaking of which, I heard that there are also exceptions." Xin was startled. "Brother Lu, you mean?" Lu Chen looked around and saw that there was no one around. He lowered his voice and said, "It's Hakushin Jinkuan's disciple. Hakushin Jinkuan has 3 disciples. His eldest disciple is our sect leader, Reverend Idle Month, who is at the Yuanying realm. As for the other 2, Zhuoxian is said to be Jin Dan Friar, and White Lotus is even worse. She is about the same as us. But I heard that these 2 fellow sect members without nascent soul realm cultivation often go up to the winter peak between the clouds and the sky to cultivate." Xin was stunned for a moment and suddenly became nervous. She grabbed Lu Chen's hand and said to him seriously, "Hey, Brother Lu, are you stupid? How could such words be spoken so carelessly? That's a perfected cultivator. A soul formation perfected cultivator, brother." Lu Chen looked at her and suddenly smiled. He nodded and said, I understand. Don't worry." Xin then let out a sigh of relief. But very quickly, it seemed that she was also a little lost in thought by Lu Chen's words. She thought for a moment and then slowly said, I think it's probably because of perfected cultivator's face." Lu Chen coughed and said seriously, "Friend Xin, I understand what you mean. You are saying that although the Kunlun party has strict rules, but at most it can only restrict Yuanying perfected cultivators. 4 soul formation perfected cultivators. These rules are useless." "Hey!" Xin jumped up in fright. Her face turned pale. She stammered, "Brother Lu, you can't speak carelessly." I don't mean that." Lu Chen laughed out loud, but halfway through, his laughter suddenly stopped. He was holding his chest with his hand, but there was a trace of pain on his face. Xin was shocked again. She hurriedly supported him and said, "Brother Lu, are you okay?" Just as she finished speaking, her body suddenly trembled, as if she suddenly thought of something. She instantly turned pale with fright and said in shock, "Aya, could it be? Could it be that you said something bad about Hakushin Jinkuan just now, and he sensed it so he gave you a punishment?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes. After taking 2 deep breaths, the pain on his face subsided and his body stabilized. Then, he angrily hit Xion's head and said, "Nonsense, do you think that perfected monarchs are immortals? There are so many people in the world who know of them. Who knows how many people have called out their names all day long? If they were to investigate them one by one, then perfected spirit-severing monarchs wouldn't be able to do anything else. They would just be annoyed to death every day." Xian was stunned for a moment and said, "If you put it like that, it seems to make a little bit of sense." "Nonsense." Xian suddenly looked a lot braver. After sticking out her tongue, her expression also became a lot smarter. After thinking for a moment, she mysteriously pulled Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "If that's really the case, it seems that the 2 disciples of Hakushin Jinkuan have indeed violated the sect rules." Lu Chen said, "I said it just now, but there are so many people in the Kunlun party, but no one has come out to say anything." Xian shrugged and said, "Brother Lu, you are also talking nonsense. Who would dare to say anything? That is a perfected spirit-severing monarch. Besides, even the current sect leader, perfected Idle Month, is also his eldest disciple. Those who still dare to say something like that are either stupid or out of their minds." Lu Chen looked at her and said with a smile, "Hey, you are not stupid recently?" "I have never been stupid," Xian said indignantly. Lu Chen also ignored Xian's protest and said to himself, "It seems that being a disciple of a perfected spirit-severing monarch is still more comfortable. I am naturally much stronger than others." "Yes." Exian said enviously, and then teased Lu Chen. Brother Lu, our Kunlun party has 2 perfected monarchs. In addition to Hakushin Jinkuan, there is also perfected monarch Tianlan, who has not yet had a disciple. If you have some sort of fortuitous encounter and are able to become his disciple, then wouldn't it be great? At that time, wouldn't you be able to get whatever you want and ascend to whatever peak you want? Lu Chen thought for a moment and said with a nod, You are right. How about this? When I become his disciple in the future, I will not care about the sect rules, and secretly take you to the strange peaks in the sky to see the scenery, okay? Exian was laughing so hard that she was rocking back and forth. Her giggles were like the crisp sound of wind chimes. She pointed at Lu Chen and laughed so hard that she couldn't say anything. After a long while, she finally caught her breath, but she was still laughing. She smiled at Lu Chen and said, Okay. Anyway, I don't think I'll have much chance to become a nascent soul Taoist master in this lifetime. When I'm really old, I'll wait for you to take me up. Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, Why do you have to wait so long? Just wait for a few years. When I become successful and famous, I will take you up to play. Wahaha! Exen laughed so hard that she bent over, laughing so hard that she could not catch her breath. She pointed at Lu Chen and shook her head desperately, then nodded repeatedly, and said, Okay, Brother Lu, I am counting on you. Lu Chen chuckled. For some reason, he suddenly felt his mood lighten up. He felt that the sky was clear, that the green mountains were black, and that the sea of clouds was magnificent. The future seemed to have suddenly become beautiful. He smiled and looked into the distance. The mountain wind blew over the 2 smiling people, and lifted their clothes. The branch of Hakushin Jinkuan holds the power, and is the strongest branch in the Kunlun party. They have been arrogant for a long time. Everyone, you and I are all disciples of Kunlun. What do we rely on for 5,000 years? It is not the number of geniuses, not the number of people, and not the occasional appearance of a perfected lord of Huashan realm. The biggest reason why the Kunlun party can be passed down to this day is because of the various rules passed down by the ancestors of the past generations. For thousands of years, how many famous sects in the cultivation world of the central region have risen and fallen, rising and falling? Have we not seen enough? Why is it that only our Kunlun party is prosperous? Rules. There is only one word, rules. A deafening voice echoed in a secret quiet room under the eldest prince of Bai Chao Tang. Someone was speaking passionately, and the others were listening carefully, nodding, or silent. There were 5 people in the quiet room, and all of them were Yuanying Zhenren. Even in a first-class sect like the Kunlun party, these 5 people were a powerful force that should not be underestimated. The 2 sitting in the front were naturally the 2 Zhenren of Bai Chao Tang. The one who spoke passionately just now was Zhenren Mingzhu, while Zhenren Qiandeng, who was sitting in the main seat, smiled and nodded calmly, as if he did not feel that Zhenren Mingzhu's words were disrespectful to Hakushin Jinkuan. Apart from the 2 of them, the other 3 Yuanying Zhenren had different expressions, and their expressions were slightly complicated. Zhenren Qiandeng's bright eyes swept across the crowd, and then he smiled and said, What junior brother Mingzhu just said, I believe all of you have the same feeling these days. Let's not talk about other things, but in the supreme forbidden area of the vault of heaven and clouds, only Zhenren Yuanying can enter. Now that Zhua Xian and White Lotus have set foot on the winter peak, it is indeed inappropriate. A fair-skinned man sitting on his right nodded and said, Senior brother Qiandeng is right. I, Guangyang, feel the same. In fact, it's not just us. As far as I know, there are many Yuanying Zhenren on the spring and autumn peaks who are dissatisfied with this. It's just that the other side is too powerful, so no one dares to voice their anger. That's right. At this time, another Yuanying Zhenren sitting opposite to Zhenren Guangyang said, But there's nothing we can do about it. Now that Hakushin Jinkuan is guarding the sect, and the Zhenren sect master is his disciple, the Bai clan's henchmen are everywhere in the sect, and we can't do anything about it. Taoist master Qiandeng smiled and said, Even so, it doesn't mean that there's no chance of a turnaround. After all, this foundation is passed down by the patriarch. As disciples of Kunlun's sect, it's our duty to clean up the roots. As he said this, he turned to look at the Yuanying Zhenren who had been sitting in the last row with his head bowed. He asked with a smile, What do you think, junior brother Muyuan? The last Yuanying Zhenren slowly raised his head. His expression was solemn and his brows were tightly furrowed, but he didn't say anything for a while. The quiet room seemed to have fallen into a moment of silence. The gazes of the other Yuanying Zhenren Qian Deng quickly fell on Masato Kahara. The air was silent, but it seemed to have suddenly become heavy. After a while, Masato Kahara looked at Zhenren Qian Deng and said, "Senior brother Qian Deng, I have something to say first." "Please speak." "Junior brother, I understand all of your intentions. I'm sure all of you are aware of my current situation. It can't get any worse. If there's a chance, it's not a bad idea to take a gamble. But..." He raised his brows and said in a low voice, "I'll say it again. If true Lord Tianlan doesn't personally promise me, I won't participate in this matter." Chapter 199. Enlightened Master Qian Deng furrowed his brows and revealed an awkward expression. The enlightened masters next to him also fell silent. The atmosphere in the quiet room was somewhat stiff. After a moment, Masato Kahara softened his tone and looked at enlightened Master Qian Deng with a sincere expression. "Senior brother Qian Deng, you and I have known each other for many years. Although we aren't friends of life and death, we should at least know each other well. I'm sure you know what kind of person I am." Enlightened Master Qian Deng slowly nodded. Masato Kahara looked around at the crowd and continued in a low voice. "Everyone here is a discerning person, so there's no need for pleasantries. The Kuanji branch is extremely powerful while my Tieji branch is in decline. Under normal circumstances, not to mention that we don't dare to get involved, even if the Kuanji's power struggle turns the world upside down, my Tieji branch may not be able to do anything. Including me, there are only 4 Yuanying enlightened masters in our Tieji branch. Apart from my disciple Su Qingjun, there are almost no outstanding talents among the disciples below the Yuanying stage." He said indifferently, "Everyone, you've dragged me into this matter for the sake of these 4 old bones of mine. However, this is no trivial matter. Once it starts, there is no way out. This is tantamount to me betting all of the legacies passed down by Patriarch Tai Luo. I really can't afford to lose in this matter." Enlightened Master Qian Deng pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Junior brother Kahara, since you are so frank, then I won't be polite and will tell you something unpleasant." Masato Kahara said, "Senior brother, please go ahead." Enlightened Master Qian Deng said, "As you said before, the Tieji branch has indeed declined in recent years. But if we continue to play it safe, we may be able to linger on for some time. But I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to prosper in the foreseeable future. I wonder if you have any objections to what I have said?" Kahara Zhenren remained silent. He did not agree, nor did he agree. Taoist Master Qian Deng didn't care about this. He only looked at him deeply and said, "Junior brother, let me give you a word of advice. Instead of dragging on and being half dead, why not fight with all his might? Martial Uncle Tianlan has already issued a decree earlier. As long as you, Tai Ji, contribute to this important matter, once it succeeds, you will definitely be rewarded. Regardless of other things, the 4 of you, Zhenren Yuanying, will definitely be arranged to cultivate in the sky." Masato Kahara's expression changed slightly as he gritted his teeth. In the Kunlun party, there had long been a sect rule, which was that those who were not in the Yuanying realm were not allowed to go up to the 4 strange peaks between the clouds and the sky to train. But in reality, because the difference in strength was too great, those who could enter the 4 floating peaks of spring, summer, autumn, and winter were all disciples of Kuanji, and the only 4 spiritual masters of Taiji had never been able to go up. Of course, this was unfair, but no one in the Kunlun party had ever dared to openly mention this matter. The reason was actually very simple. Needless to say anything else, one only needed to look at the background of the 2 supreme deity transformation stage sovereigns in the sect. "I understand what you're saying," Masato Kahara said to Taoist Master Qian Deng, "but this matter is of great importance, and I can't be careless. Hakushin Jinkuan's lineage is powerful and has countless henchmen in the sect. It won't be easy to become enemies with them." He lightly pointed in a certain direction and said, "Let's not talk about other things. Even if we do well, Hakushin Jinkuan is still on the winter peak. How can we solve this? This matter must be personally handled by perfected Lord Tianlan. Only then we have a little chance. If he doesn't appear, we, Taiji, will not get involved in this muddy water." Qian Deng gently exhaled and said, I understand what you mean. Masato Kahara slightly lowered her head and said, Senior brother, please don't blame me for my rudeness. Taoist Master Chen Deng waved his hand and said, It's human nature. Don't mind it. He paused for a moment and then said, I received the news yesterday. A few days before the next full moon, Uncle Master Tianlan will rush back from Zhengxianmeng to participate in the annual sect council. Let's see when the time comes. Maybe he will talk to you himself. Masato Kahara slightly bowed and nodded. Thank you for your understanding, senior brother. Thank you for perfected Lord Tianlan's kindness. Taoist Master Chen Deng looked at the crowd and suddenly raised his voice a little. He said, Everyone, I've already told you about this important matter. I'm sure everyone is aware of the cause of this matter. When Ancestor Tian Hong was still alive, everyone in the sect knew that the most beloved disciple of the founder was Uncle Master Tianlan. Even the Taoist name, Tian, was passed on to him. The meaning couldn't be clearer. He wanted Uncle Master Tianlan to lead the Kunlun party and inherit the position of sect leader. However, things took a turn for the worse. Ancestor Tian Hong passed away unexpectedly, leaving only Uncle Master Bai Chen and Tianlan. In the end, it was Hakushin Jinkuan who inherited all the legacies of the sect, while Uncle Master Tianlan was forced to Zhengxianmeng to fight to the death with those fierce and ruthless devil cult monsters. I don't need to say more about the meaning of this. Taoist Master Chen Deng sighed and then said, However, many years later, Hakushin Jinkuan passed the position of sect leader to his eldest disciple. Since then his power has grown. Now, the discipline of the sect has been corrupted and there are many villains and spies. However, Idle Month and the others are powerless. They can't resist the strong enemies and revitalize the sect. Internally, many mediocre villains are raised to gain prestige, causing the reputation of the Kunlun party to decline day by day. What's funny is that Idle Month and the others think that the sect is thriving and boast about it. They are shameless. Uncle Master Tianlan once said to me that although he is indifferent and doesn't care about fame and benefits, he can't sit back and watch when the sect is gradually falling into a dangerous situation. Otherwise, how can he face Ancestor Tian Hong after 100 years? He also won't have the face to face the founders of the Kunlun party. Set things right and clean up the roots. This is what Uncle Master Tianlan wants to do. At the end of his speech, Chen Deng's expression was solemn, but he said it resolutely and decisively. Immediately, the expressions of the people around him tightened and they all nodded in agreement. The days when Su Qingjun wasn't on the Fian Terrace seemed particularly cold and cheerless. However, perhaps because he was already used to this kind of loneliness, Lu Chen didn't feel sad. Instead, he felt a lot more at ease. However, after midnight, Lu Chen led the Atsu sect down the Nanlu Mountain Road and went straight to Kunwu City. When he came to Kunwu City, he actually only had one place to go most of the time, to look for Old Ma in the Black Hill Pavilion. This time, when he passed by the place where the murder happened on the street, he looked a little tired. That house was no longer available for rent. After all, someone had died in the courtyard, and there were actually a few unfamiliar men guarding the door in the house, preventing outsiders from entering or leaving at will. Perhaps there were some bad-tempered cultivators who wanted to cause trouble, but soon, everyone saw or knew that these guards were all disciples of the Kunlun party. Most of the individual cultivators in Kunwu City didn't know who the person who died in the door was, so there were all kinds of guesses. Some of them even made people laugh until they scratched their heads. For example, the person who died in the house was an extremely powerful spiritual master Yuanying. What kind of secret technique was he hiding in the city? Or perhaps, someone thought that a genius of the Kunlun party that only appeared once in 100 years lived here and was afraid that he would be discovered and died prematurely, so he hid here. However, these words were actually considered polite. The most outrageous thing was that some people even said that there were women's clothes in this mysterious house. Perhaps they were the old lovers of the spiritual master Idle Month, the current spiritual master of the Kunlun party. This kind of words could be said to be malicious, but of course it was also possible that some people were really stupid and wanted to discredit spiritual master Idle Month. Of course, Lu Chen knew what happened in the house, but he naturally didn't know some specific details. One of the reasons he came to Kunwu City today was to ask Old Ma about what happened that day in detail. But this time, the most important thing for Lu Chen in Kunwu City was still Atsu. Although Atsu's appearance didn't seem to have changed much, Lu Chen knew that under this black dog's fur, Signs of valiance and ferocity had gradually begun to show. In any case, it was no longer suitable to keep it on the mountain of Kunlun. Otherwise, in the future, Atsu might turn the mountain upside down. As for those powerful Yuanying spiritual masters of the Kunlun party, if they wanted to deal with such a black dog, they had almost endless powerful methods. Lu Chen didn't even dare to think about what would happen to Atsu if it really caused trouble in the future. He took one last look at the house guarded by the disciples of the Heavenly Soldier Hall of the Kunlun party, then left with Atsu, heading to the shabby and deserted Black Hill Pavilion. Old Ma was very happy to see Lu Chen, but after hearing Lu Chen's instructions, he suddenly looked embarrassed and said, "Lu Chen, you see, now that everything here is under repair, we don't have much money left. As for me, I actually don't have much interest in raising a dog, so," Lu Chen said indifferently, "I'll pay." Old Ma suddenly stood up and said righteously, "So of course, this dog can stay. I will take care of it." Lu Chen smiled and didn't care. He just said, "In fact, you don't have to take care of it for too long. You just need to feed it something every day. Also, don't let it run out to the streets casually. It might cause trouble if it's not handled properly." "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Old Ma looked at Lu Chen with some doubts and said, "Isn't this an ordinary dog? What kind of trouble can there be?" Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "This matter is settled. In short, take good care of it for the next few days. When the matter is settled, live until a few days before the night of the full moon. I will find a time to send it away. The farther the better." Old Ma frowned and suddenly looked at Lu Chen. He asked, "What do you want to do when the night of the full moon arrives?" Chapter 200. Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Isn't it about the traitor of the evil cult?" Old Ma pointed at Atsu and said, "What does that have to do with it? Why must it be sent away before the night of the full moon? Our top priority right now is to find the traitor of the evil cult. At this critical moment, do you have to divert your attention to send away a dog?" He paused and looked at Lu Chen with a frown. "I think you're a little strange today. Did something happen?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Nothing, I'm fine." Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then nodded and said, "You're an old man, I won't say anything unnecessary. Anyway, be careful." Lu Chen stood up and patted him on the shoulder, then turned around and walked towards the gate. Atsu wanted to follow him, but Lu Chen stopped it. After thinking for a while, he brought it to the courtyard and gave it something to eat. He stroked Atsu's back and whispered something to it. He didn't know if Atsu understood, but it just sat on the ground and didn't follow. When Lu Chen walked through the narrow passageway, he looked back and could still see the black dog quietly sitting in the quiet courtyard, staring at his back. There was a faint light flashing in its only eye. Lu Chen laughed and waved at Atsu. Atsu swung its tail and barked at him. Su Qingjun returned to the mountain after a few days. When Lu Chen saw her, she was walking over from the mountain path. Her face looked a little haggard and her expression was a little heavy. However, when she saw Lu Chen's figure, she still revealed a trace of a smile. She quickened her footsteps and walked over. She sized him up and said, "Are you all right?" Lu Chen loosened his muscles and said with a smile, I'm fine." Su Qingjun showed a gratified smile, then a little apologetic and said, "I should have come back to see you earlier, but I couldn't leave home." Lu Chen waved his hand and said with a smile, "It's okay, I'm fine." "But what happened at home? Did something urgent happen?" Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and then said softly, "There's no need to hide it from you. My brother, Su Mo, had a relapse after returning home that night. He was delirious, and his mouth was full of nonsense. His condition was terrible, as if..." She didn't finish her words, as if she didn't know what to say. She probably couldn't bear to use the word idiot on her brother. Lu Chen said and didn't say anything else. He just accompanied her to walk around the Flying Goose Terrace. They gradually walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds in front of them. As the mountain breeze blew, Su Qingjun sighed and said, "My parents have always loved my brother the most, so they were naturally heartbroken to see him in such a miserable state. Then they went around looking for people to treat him, and I also had to help them ask for help. As for you, I was also a little worried that you would also be in the same situation when you went back. That would be terrible. But I really couldn't leave in that situation, so I had to ask younger sister Exian to help me see you. But when I heard that you were safe and sound, I was relieved. Lu Chen nodded and said, I'm fine, you don't need to worry. After he said that, he muttered to himself for a moment, then glanced at Su Qingjun and said, Right, I heard something else happened a few days ago. That He Yi's brother, He Gang, met with an accident in Kunwu City? Su Qingjun smiled bitterly and said, Yes, it did happen. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I can't return to the mountain. Originally, when my brother was tossed around like that, my Su family was furious and we were unwilling to let He Yi go, but this incident happened. In the end, it seemed like overnight, that senior martial brother He became the victim. Everyone thought that our Su family paid for the murderer to take revenge. Lu Chen thought for a moment then asked Su Qingjun, It really wasn't done by your Su family? Su Qingjun rolled her eyes at him and said angrily, Of course it wasn't. Didn't I just say it? Lu Chen laughed and said, I'm just joking. But you have to say, when I heard about this, my first reaction was indeed to think of your family. This matter is too coincidental. Now, many people in the sect are talking about it in private, and they all think it was done by your family. With a gloomy expression, Su Qingjun said somewhat helplessly, Who said it wasn't? It's a pity that we can't come out and explain it. This matter is quite strange, but senior martial brother He lost his younger brother, and he has Dukan Zhenren and the sect head standing behind him. Now, it's them who are in the right. Our Su family really can't vent our anger, so we can only swallow it for the time being. Lu Chen looked at the woman beside him and saw that there was a slight annoyance on her face. Her chest was heaving up and down, probably because she was still angry in her heart. But when the light from the sky shone down and the cool breeze blew past her temples, her beautiful hair fluttering in the wind, she was still as elegant and beautiful as before. There was even a feeling that after being separated for so many days, she seemed to be even more beautiful than before. No one spoke at the edge of the cliff for a while. It was quiet like a paradise. Su Qingjuan's mood gradually calmed down. After a while, she suddenly blushed and said to Lu Chen somewhat apologetically, I'm sorry. I originally wanted to come back and see how your injuries are, but in the end, it turned into me complaining to you. Lu Chen smiled and said, No matter, I'm fine, it doesn't matter if I listen. But you don't need to be too angry. After saying that, he paused for a moment and said again, Then this matter, you're just going to let it go like this. Su Qingjun suddenly sneered and said, Of course not, I only have this one younger brother. He was muddle-headed and was messed up like this. Whether he will recover in the future is still unknown. How can I let this matter go like this? Besides, I also heard rumors that He Yi's senior martial brother, he is very sad about his younger brother's death. Although he didn't say anything excessive, but I guess with his personality, I'm afraid that he won't be willing to let this matter go. In short, no matter what, our Su family and his surname He, this enmity is formed. Su Qingjun said indifferently. Lu Chen frowned and said, It sounds really troublesome. Su Qingjun said, It doesn't matter if it's troublesome or not. Previously, our Su family temporarily endured it out of consideration for the sect master and the other big shots. We didn't want to cause any misunderstandings. But if senior martial brother He really wants to shed all pretense of cordiality and fight, our Su family can't possibly be afraid of him. When saying this, Su Qingjuan's expression was stern, but there was also a trace of pride. She was probably a big family that had been passed down for many years, so she should have a bit of confidence and confidence. Lu Chen nodded and echoed a few words. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, Actually, this matter is like this now, but the most hateful thing is that person who plotted in the dark. He found this opportunity to deliberately provoke hatred between us. It's really hateful. As she said this, she gritted her teeth and looked at the sea of clouds in the distance. She said to Lu Chen, If I can find this person in the future, I will definitely kill him. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he smiled and nodded, saying, You're right. This person is too evil. He should be killed. When the sky turned dark, Su Qingjun had already returned to her cave to rest. The Fian terrace was peaceful. A bright moon rose in the night sky and sprinkled its moonlight down. Atu's figure was nowhere to be seen in the wooden hut, making Lu Chen feel a bit more empty than before. He wondered if Atu, who was in Kunwu City at the foot of the mountain, was also looking at the moon like this. He stared at the bright moon in the night sky and frowned slightly as if he was thinking about something. But soon, His expression suddenly changed. He sat up and looked outside the window. Sure enough, after a moment, a petite figure appeared in his field of vision. Lu Chen sighed and didn't get up. He just looked at the figure outside the window and said, "What are you doing here again?" That person came closer and the moonlight illuminated her face. It was White Lotus. This young girl with an otherworldly beauty looked especially noble and beautiful under the moonlight, as if she was a fairy that descended from the sky. She didn't stand on ceremony with Lu Chen. She walked over and put her hand on the windowsill, then she directly jumped up and sat on it. She then looked down at the room and was suddenly startled. She said, "Where's Atsu?" "I drove him away," Lu Chen said faintly. "That stupid dog is too stupid. It's annoying to look at." White Lotus snorted. Her face showed that she obviously didn't believe his words. But from this angle, Lu Chen suddenly discovered that the collar of White Lotus's clothes today was very high up, just covering most of her neck. As if she sensed Lu Chen's gaze, White Lotus smiled and reached out to touch her neck, said, "Thanks to you, that wound is very strange and it won't heal for a long time. Sometimes, I really wonder what your identity is. You always use these indescribable demonic methods." Lu Chen sat up straighter. His face revealed a solemn expression and said to White Lotus, "I am not an evil sect spy." White Lotus snorted. Although she looked somewhat disdainful, for some reason she seemed to believe his words. Lu Chen looked at the dark night outside, shook his head and said to White Lotus, "I say, you have nothing better to do than to run around all day. First, is it because your omnipotent master doesn't care about you? Second, this mountain still has a curfew. If you are seen by the patrolling disciples, wouldn't it be embarrassing?" White Lotus' face was full of disdain, said, "First, my master usually doesn't care about me. He has a lot of things to do and can't wait to cultivate every day. Second, curfew is a fart. Sect rules are a fart. I am the direct disciple of a Huashan true monarch, not to mention those trash can't catch me. Even if they see me, what can they do to me?" Lu Chen was silent, then smiled bitterly and said, "You are so young but you can see it clearly." White Lotus sat high up on the windowsill, looked down at him and said, "Nonsense, people in this world are divided into high and low. How can those without ability sit on the same level as us? Why are you pretending to be a saint?" Lu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. He turned to look at the moon in the sky. The moon tonight was bright and full, illuminating a large part of the dark night sky. There were only 7 days left until the next full moon night. Chapter 201. Under the moonlight, that young girl sat on the windowsill of the wooden house with her feet dangling in the air, one hand on the windowsill, the other on her lap. The night breeze blew over faintly, ruffling the corner of her clothes. Occasionally her feet would gently kick a few times, as if lingering with the wind, and also like a child suddenly floating up, just for fun. On her lips, there was a sudden smile, light but gentle, just like what a 10-year-old girl should have. The night was deep. The moonlight was cold. For some reason, she still had no intention of leaving. She suddenly quietened down, not asking Lu Chen about Atsu's whereabouts, nor did she speak ill of Lu Chen. In that instant, Lu Chen suddenly had a very strange feeling that White Lotus was just sitting there playing. But of course Lu Chen would not really treat this girl as an ordinary 10-year-old girl. What a joke! With the vicious methods that she had displayed previously, Lu Chen felt that if his cultivation was slightly lacking, he would not be able to see the moon tonight. But this stalemate did not seem to be a solution. White Lotus did not seem to care at all. But this place was Lu Chen's wooden house. At least Lu Chen still wanted to sleep tonight. With an exceptionally dangerous girl like White Lotus sitting on the windowsill, no matter how brave Lu Chen was, he felt that he did not dare to close his eyes. So Lu Chen felt that he still had to speak to White Lotus, thinking that since everyone had nothing to say, wouldn't it be best to go back to their own homes and sleep? When he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a low humming sound coming from White Lotus's mouth, and slowly, she started to sing a little song. The crescent moon, seeing the acacia. Red clothes, dressing for whom? Yeah. Time passes like water. White hair flustered. Seeing the red makeup in the morning. Separated by 1,000 mountains at dusk. Yeah. This song was short and simple, and the meaning of the words was graceful. However, when she sang it, it carried a trace of loneliness and loneliness. She was like a lonely woman that was filled with deep thoughts, and it was completely unlike the feeling she should have at her age. But in the eyes of Lu Chen, who had seen White Lotus's vicious methods, he did not see White Lotus as a little girl. But even so, when he heard this song, he still felt a sudden and inexplicable trance. The moonlight shone on by Lian's beautiful face, making her seem like an otherworldly fairy. Her voice also seemed to reverberate through the 9 heavens. Her voice was light and translucent, almost reaching a state of perfection. Anyone who heard it would immediately be immersed in it, as if they were looking at the woman in the song that they longed for. The night was dim, the cold wind was silent, her voice gradually faded, and then disappeared. Lu Chen suddenly said, "This song, where did you learn it from?" White Lotus turned her head to look at him and said, "Why do you ask?" After a pause, she asked again, "How was my singing, was it good?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but still nodded, and said, "It was really good. Your voice is extraordinary. This little song from your mouth can be said to be a little more celestial." White Lotus giggled as if she was suddenly very happy, and then said to herself, "I said, a genius like me. How can there be anything that I can't do well? Even if it's singing, it must be the best." Lu Chen said softly, "This song sounds a little familiar, as if I have heard it before, can you tell me?" White Lotus laughed and then said, "No." Lu Chen was startled and said, "Why not?" White Lotus said, "Because I'm happy, I can do whatever I want, I don't want to tell you so I won't tell you." Lu Chen was speechless. White Lotus looked at him, seemed to be a little happy, and then said with a little pride, "Come on, you are lucky enough today. Let me tell you, in this world, no one can hear my song, you are the first, so you can go burn incense in the morning." Lu Chen was moved, looked at White Lotus and said, "If that's the case, then my luck is really good. But I heard you sing so well, no matter who heard it, they will like it. Why no one else has heard it?" White Lotus' face stiffened, and her eyes slightly drooped and said, "No one is willing to listen, they all hope that they all want me to practice hard and do something big." As she said that, it was as if a stone in her heart had been unintentionally moved. Her expression suddenly relaxed, and she raised her hands to stretch. Her face was languid, and she even tilted her head to one side in a strange manner. She then said, "That's why I say, although you're not a good person, and you're full of evil tricks, it seems that only at your place can I sing and scold people freely. Isn't that right, bastard?" Lu Chen heard her scolding, but he was not angry. After staring at her for a while, he suddenly shook his head, sighed, and said, "You are so young, what kind of life did you live in the past?" "Hee, I just lied to you a few times, and you took it seriously." White Lotus suddenly laughed, and pointed at Lu Chen, shook her head, and said with a smile, "Look at your silly face. Do you still want to comfort me, or save me from the sea of bitterness?" Lu Chen shrugged, and did not speak. White Lotus jumped down from the windowsill, and waved at Lu Chen, saying, "That dog has a secret I want to know. I will definitely come again. Don't try to avoid me." As she said this, she walked away with light footsteps. Lu Chen looked at her back, and saw her bouncing footsteps. It seemed that in this cold night, her mood was really much better than before. Probably, right? The day of the sect council on the 15th of this month was getting closer and closer, so recently, the Kunlun party had a more tense and solemn atmosphere. This kind of sect council was also a rule passed down by the ancestors. It was held once a year, to review the past and look forward to the future, and to evaluate many matters, including the redistribution of many resources and spiritual materials within the sect, so it could be said to be the most important matter in the Kunlun party. According to the rules of the Kunlun sect, cultivators above Jin Dan realm could attend the sect council, and all cultivators above Yuanying Zhenren must attend. Of course, supreme existences like deity transformation stage Zhenren still had special privileges. However, in the past few years, or to be exact, after Zhenren Idol Month became the sect leader, Hakushin Jinkuan would appear in the sect council every year. On the contrary, because Zhenren Tianlan was busy with many things in Zhengxian Meng, he did not come back to participate. Of course, the annual event had to be treated with caution. In the Zhangyang Hall of Tiankuan Peak, some people had already begun to decorate the place. The other big and small matters in the sect had also gradually quietened down, giving way to the most important event of the year. Lu Chen was still quietly waiting for the arrival of the night of the full moon. However, there were still many doubts in Lu Chen's heart about the mysterious spy of the devil cult secretly arranging to meet on the night of the full moon. Not to mention other things, This coincidentally happened on the same day as the most important event of the year in the Kunlun party. Could it be another coincidence? Lu Chen did not believe it. He felt that there might be some strange twists and turns in this matter that he did not know about. However, he still knew nothing about the spy of the devil cult, so the only thing he could do was to wait. At the same time, he was also wondering if he should take advantage of these few days to quickly go down the mountain and take Black Dog away from Kunwu City. At the very least, it would be better to throw him into the forest outside the city. No one could guess the various calculations in Lu Chen's heart. Everyone in the Kunlun party was busy in an orderly manner. Reverend Idle Month was in charge of the overall situation, but the person in charge of all kinds of miscellaneous and trivial matters was not him, but Reverend Idle Month's junior brother Xiaofan. As a Jin Dan friar, the second disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan, and also the sect head Reverend's junior brother, Xiaofan had a prominent reputation in the Kunlun party for many years. Most of the cultivators, including Reverend Yuanying, treated him with respect. Xiaofan was also a very capable person. He was smart and capable, and he almost never made a mistake in handling big and small matters. He had always been deeply trusted by both Hakushin Jinkuan and Reverend Idle Month. On this day, when Xiaofan walked out of the winter peak above the clouds in the sky, he turned his head and saw the entrance of his third junior sister's cave not far away from his own cave. White Lotus was standing there, looking into the distance in a daze. The wind and snow filled the sky, falling leisurely on the winter peak, which was like a wonder of the world. White Lotus was wearing a white snow mink coat. She stood there like a beautiful statue, so beautiful that it was suffocating. However, Xiaofan was old and experienced, so he was not too surprised. He only smiled and said, "Junior sister, you're up so early?" White Lotus turned around. Her expression was cold, just like the cold snowflakes that filled the sky. She was polite but with a hint of alienation. She bowed to Xiaofan and said, "Second senior brother, good morning." Xiaofan nodded and said, "I have to go down the mountain to do something today. I might not come back during the day. Be careful on the mountain alone." White Lotus said, "Little sister knows. Senior brother, don't worry." Xiaofan smiled. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly heard Bai Lian ask, "Second senior, there's something I'd like to ask you." Xiaofan stopped and said, "Junior sister, please say it." White Lotus said, "I heard that at the foot of the mountain. That is in the sect. There has been a big commotion recently. There is an evil faction spy who infiltrated our Kunlun party and killed an innocent disciple." Xiaofan was silent for a moment and then nodded and said, "There is indeed such a thing. The disciple who died is called He Changsheng. His ancestor used to be a disciple of our Kunlun party. Later on, his family declined. But when it came to his generation, it looked like he wanted to pull himself together. Unfortunately, he met with such a thing." White Lotus frowned and said, "I think I have heard of He family once before, but I don't have much impression of it. But this evil faction kills people and does evil. Why don't we go and catch them?" Xiaofan said, "We have already sent people to investigate. Unfortunately, the evil faction is treacherous. So far, we haven't found anything. Instead, we have caused a lot of trouble for no reason." White Lotus looked at him and asked. Xiaofan was slightly surprised, but then he thought of White Lotus's family background and felt relieved. He said, "It's him. I heard that he hasn't been well recently?" White Lotus asked. Xiaofan looked at White Lotus strangely. Usually, this girl would rarely talk so much. But he still patiently said, "Yes, I heard that in the process of investigating, he had some conflicts with the Su family in Kunwu City. Recently, he was also caught by his master and went back to closed-door training. But how to say it, this time, it seems to be a blessing in disguise, right?" White Lotus was a bit surprised and said, "What do you mean?" Xiaofan indifferently said, "I heard that the day before yesterday, he used great willpower to subdue his inner demons. In his anger, he turned his grief into great strength and broke through the Jin Dan realm in one fell swoop. Now he is the same as me, a Jin Dan friar." He looked at White Lotus and faintly smiled. He leisurely said, "At his age, his future is really limitless." Chapter 202. The Kunlun mountain range was majestic and towering on the western continent. It had attracted the attention of countless heroes for thousands of years. At this moment, on a quiet street in Kunwu City, there were two men standing side by side. They were looking at the undulating mountain range from afar. One of them had an ordinary appearance. He was wearing an old robe that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. He looked like a scholar who had studied for many years but had achieved nothing. He looked at the mountain in the distance and suddenly smiled. However, he said to the person beside him, "Brother Chen, are they really not your people?" The man standing beside him was a familiar face. He was Chen He, who had appeared at the gathering point of the demon sect in the Celestial City. At this moment, Chen He shook his head and said, "Brother Fan Tue, it is indeed not us. Actually, when we found out that the reincarnation array had appeared on the Kunlun mountain, we initially thought that it was the work of the spies from the Western continent. Elder Gue was worried that you would be too hasty, so he asked me to come and take a look." The man called Fan Tue smiled. His eyes flickered as he said, "Thank you for your kind intentions, Elder Gue. I have troubled Brother Chen to make this trip." The two of them turned their backs to the Kunlun mountain and slowly walked along the street. Chen He smiled and said to Fan Tue, "Then this matter is a little strange. It is not done by the Western Continent sect, nor is it done by the followers of the Celestial City of the Middle Continent. The other sects are also far away from the Western Continent. It is impossible for them to come all the way here to interfere with the affairs of the Kunlun party. So, who is the one who did this?" Fan Tue shrugged and looked helpless. He said, "Perhaps it is a spy who was planted into the Kunlun party long ago but has lost contact with us? Ever since the battle in the Barren Valley 10 years ago, the elites of the Holy Sect have suffered heavy losses. We are leaderless and in a mess. Indeed, we cannot contact many people." Chen He nodded and looked at Fan Tue. He said, "Brother Fan, the situation over the years has been difficult. However, you have persevered in the Western continent and turned the tide. You have maintained the situation and gradually recuperated to recover your strength. That is why we are where we are today. I admire you very much. Even Elder Gue is full of praise for you." Fan Tue smiled and glanced at Chen He. He did not reply. Chen He continued, "But Brother Fan, from the looks of it, our holy church has indeed reached a point where we cannot continue to be in chaos any longer. Someone on Kunlun Mountain who can use such a high-level magical power as the reincarnation formation must be an important figure in our holy church. However, we know nothing about it. Even to this day, we have not been able to contact that person. Furthermore, after the incident, our first reaction was to confirm which sect that person was from. If we don't change this embarrassing situation, our holy church will definitely have no hope of reviving." Fan Tue said, "Brother Chen, there's no harm in speaking your mind." Chen He clapped his hands and said, "Good, Brother Fan is a straightforward man. Elder Gue thinks highly of Brother Fan's talent and wishes to meet you and appoint you as the vice-hierarch of the Holy Church. I wonder if Brother Fan is interested?" Fan Tue's expression changed slightly. He looked straight at Chen He and said in shock, "Deputy Sect Master?" Chen He nodded and said, "That's right." Fan Tue said, "If I remember correctly, even during the Battle of the Barren Valley 10 years ago, our holy church only had the position of elder and not the hierarch. In reality, the Elders' Council of the Holy Church has been discussing matters for many years. The position of hierarch has been empty for hundreds of years, right?" "That's right," Chen He smiled and nodded. Fan Tue's eyes flashed. "Then I don't understand what you mean by that, Brother Chen?" he asked. Chen He said calmly, "Now is a time of crisis for the Holy Church. 3 of the 5 great elders died in the Barren Valley. A few years ago, Zhengxian Meng and Fuyunji assassinated us. Elder Feng also died. Now, only Elder Gue is left. Therefore, after much consideration, Elder Gue felt that we should break the old and establish a new one. We should appoint a new hierarch. This way, we can unify the Holy Church and end the current chaotic situation. All the sects in the world will work together to complete the great cause of unifying the 3 realms." Fan Tue took a deep breath. A moment later he said, "Then the position of hierarch," Chen He said directly, "of course it will be Elder Gue. In the entire Holy Church, only he can convince the masses." Fan Tue nodded. After a moment of silence, he suddenly smiled and said to Chen He, "If that's the case, your sincerity in giving me the position of deputy hierarch is great." Chen He said sincerely, Brother Fan, as long as you agree to it, you will be above everyone else. In the future, when the Holy Church succeeds, there will definitely be a place for you in the deity temple. Fan Tue said calmly, Brother Chen, you are too serious. The deity temple is the residence of the elites of our Holy Church. I do not dare to hope for it. It is just that the matter that I have just discussed is of great importance and involves many people. I also have a large group of people under me. It is not something that I can decide on alone. Please allow me to carefully consider this matter for a period of time. Chen He looked forward, his gaze slightly cold. However, he quickly replied politely, Of course. The two of them walked forward together. As they looked at the bustling Kunwu city with its buildings, Chen He suddenly said, Then what about that person on Kunlun Mountain? Fan Tue pondered for a moment and said, Since the reincarnation array has appeared, that person must be a disciple of our Holy Church. As for the fact that we have no contact with either of us, that is probably the result of the chaos in the Holy Church over the past few years. But no matter what, with such a powerful fellow disciple here, we can't just ignore it. Chen He nodded in agreement and said, What Brother Fan said makes sense. That is what I think as well. Furthermore, that person might have done this to spread the news and try to contact us. I think he might be at the Kunlun party. At this point, he did not continue. He simply used his hand to draw a random shape in the air. It looked like a circle, but it was a little curved and undulating. It was unknown what it was. However, Fan Tue clearly recognized this gesture. After looking at it, he nodded and said, Yes, I will arrange for someone to go. Chen He glanced at him with a smile and said, Brother Fan, you are indeed impressive. It seems like you can even plant someone into a top-notch sect like the Kunlun party. However, Fan Tue did not look pleased. He only waved his hand and said, This is nothing. Actually, a large sect like the Kunlun party has many disciples. It is not too difficult. However, at most, they will be the lowest-ranking servant disciples. It will be extremely difficult to recruit people from the higher ranks. Chen He smiled and said, No worries. We still have a long way to go. There will be a chance to let them know how powerful our Holy Church is in the future. The two of them smiled at each other, as though they had been good friends for many years. It was as though there were no grudges between them. They walked forward shoulder to shoulder and walked past an inconspicuous and secluded alley on the side of the long street. In the deep and quiet alley, the signboard of the Black Hill Pavilion was still hanging on the doorframe. It looked at the quiet alley alone, waiting for a customer that seemed like it would never come. Old Ma sat on his favorite recliner, his eyes half closed as he dozed off. Behind him, in the courtyard of the back hall, separated by a long and narrow passageway, Atsu was quietly lying there. On the other side of the courtyard was a large basin. There were many meat bones in it. Based on its usual habits, the abnormally gluttonous Atsu would have finished the large basin a long time ago. However, for some reason, there was still more than half of the food left in the basin today. Atsu was lying on the ground in the courtyard. Its expression was a little lazy and listless. It was as though even the meat bones had lost their attraction to it. On this quiet and lazy afternoon, it was as though the sunlight was gentle and powerless. At this moment, a soft cry suddenly came from the wall in front of them. Atsu's ears pricked up and it raised its head to look up. Between the green tiles on the wall, the figure of a wildcat appeared. The wildcat carefully walked on the high wall. From time to time, it looked left and right. Suddenly, it saw the large basin of meat bones in the courtyard below. Its eyes suddenly lit up. Atsu looked up at the figure of the wildcat. Its only eye was glimmering. Then, it watched the cat look around for a while. Then, it began to carefully jump down the high wall and walk towards the basin of meat. The wildcat was very careful. It kept looking around and naturally, it soon saw the black dog on the other side of the courtyard. Atsu stared at the wildcat closely, but it did not show any strange movements or expressions. It just slowly stood up. The wildcat was a little scared and took a few steps back. However, when it saw that Atsu did not have any intention of rushing over, it waited for a while and slowly became braver. The fragrant meat bones seemed to be particularly tempting, and it could not help but walk over there. The wildcat stared at Atsu while slowly walking towards the meat bones. The small courtyard was very quiet. There was no sound at all. In the depths of Atsu's eyes, There was a faint beautiful luster that lit up like a green flame. The wild cat knew nothing about it. Most of its attention was now on the basin of meat bones in front of it. After a while, it finally got to the edge of the basin. Then it could not bear it any longer. It buried its head and took a big bite. However, the wild cat still did not let down its guard. With the meat in its mouth, it immediately looked up at Atsu. However, Atsu still stood in the same place and did not move. The wild cat tried a few times and finally felt relieved. It meowed a few times and was overjoyed to start this hearty meal. Until it buried its head and ate happily, it suddenly found that there was a shadow covering the top of its head. It covered its entire body. In an instant, the fur on the wild cat's body stood up. It raised its head with a scream and saw that a black dog was already standing beside it. A single terrifying eye was flashing with jade-like flames as it stared intently at the wild cat. A terrifyingly large mouth slowly opened halfway, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. The wild cat screamed in horror and jumped up to escape. However, suddenly, a dog's leg quickly pressed down from mid-air. With just one move, it was firmly pressed to the ground. The next moment, the dark shadow completely drowned and swallowed the wild cat. Chapter 203. There were many odd-job disciples in Kunlun Mountain. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy in this famous sect. They did most of the hard work, but they only received negligible rewards. What they hoped for was a very big dream. Most people were like this, but only a very small number of people could reach the sky in a single bound. To some extent, Lu Chen was actually one of them. However, there were not many people like Lu Chen. In the fragrance garden where he had worked before, there were still countless odd-job disciples who were still struggling to survive, unable to make a name for themselves. Zhang Ji was such an ordinary odd-job disciple. He had been in the Kunlun party for many years, but there had been no improvement. In the beginning, Zhang Ji had actually worked hard, diligently doing all the work that he could do, tenaciously persevering to do his best in the hard work, but even so, there were no opportunities falling on his head from the sky. Therefore, Zhang Ji gradually slacked off. He had been dissatisfied, wronged and angry, but he was just an ordinary person. Other than his average ability, he was actually very afraid of death. So in the end, Zhang Ji finally became a wily old fox, and not the kind of madman that occasionally appeared. Because he had been in the Kunlun mountain for a long time, and because he was experienced enough in the fragrance garden, in general, Zhang Ji's life among the odd-job disciples was not bad. However, a few days ago, he was at a disadvantage in a dispute with a person called He Chongxing, and he was knocked unconscious on the spot. However, the main character of this dispute was not Zhang Ji, nor was it He Chongxing. In fact, it was a few high-ranking aristocratic children, and the matter was later left unsettled. Zhang Ji was very angry when he was at a disadvantage, but one day after a while, he heard something. He Chongxing had died. He died very suddenly, inexplicably, and it was said that he died very miserably. Zhang Ji didn't see it with his own eyes, but he heard all kinds of descriptions from the people around him. At first, he was happy with the misfortune of others, but after a long time when he calmed down, he also felt sad for the death of a rabbit. Moreover, they heard that the murderer was very likely to be a sorcerer from the devil cult, which was even more inconceivable. To be honest, Zhang Ji had known He Chongxing for a long time. Although their relationship was ordinary, he really did not think that this person would have anything to do with the devil cult. After a period of time, when he had almost forgotten about this matter, another person named He Yi brought him over and interrogated him for a long time. What did He Chongxing do? Why was the sect still investigating this murder case after he had been dead for so long? Zhang Ji didn't know why, but when he was confused, he actually felt a little jealous and envious. He knew that if he died in an accident, it would never attract the attention of the Kunlun party. Not many people would even pay attention to it. After all, they were all odd-job disciples. Zhang Ji was such an ordinary person, a selfish person with some human emotions. He had dreams before, fantasizing that one day he would become an immortal and his name would shake the world. Of course, these things seemed to be impossible now. But, who didn't want to be different? Well, if there was a chance to come. Every day when Zhang Ji woke up and went out, he would look at the house that He Chongxing once lived in, which was now empty and abandoned. Then he would have a thought in his heart, thinking that probably now, other than those who wanted to catch the evil sect's evil people, He was probably the only one left who still remembered He Chongqing. This was really a very strange thing. Until that morning, when there were still 6 days before the sect council meeting, Zhang Ji did not walk out of the door like usual. Until noon, when a passerby noticed something was wrong and reported, the guarding disciples who rushed over then discovered that Zhang Ji had taken the same path as He Chongqing. He was dead. Dead in his own house. Heard that his death was quite tragic. Heard that the house was full of blood. Also heard that this time it was done by the damn devil cult sorcerer again. Not sure if the devil cult of the 3 realms paid special attention to the Kunlun party. Maybe they should. But now that the sect council meeting was about to be held, and He Chongqing's murder case had not been solved, the tragedy of killing Zhang Ji happened again, without a doubt, in front of everyone in Kunlun Mountain. It gave the Kunlun party another hard slap in the face. The devil cult savagery was outrageous. The one who suffered the most from this slap was, of course, the leader of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idle Month. As the leader of the sect, such things happened continuously. If it happened once, it could be said to be an accident, but if it happened again, it could really make people doubt his ability. Therefore, Reverend Idle Month was furious. His angry roar in the Zhangyang Hall of Tiankuan Peak could be heard not only from outside the hall, but even the people at the foot of the mountain could hear it. However, although Reverend Idle Month was extremely angry, there were some things that could not be changed by his will, and some people were not afraid of his anger. A few Yuanying realm Zenrans led by Bai Chao Tang were very dissatisfied with this matter. They said bluntly that the devil cult was so rampant. Could people still live in the dignified Kunlun in the future? Did everyone still want their face? Why couldn't they catch the murderer after so long? Was it because the murderer was too cunning, or were they incompetent? These questions were like knives stabbing at Reverend Idle Month, making him tired of dealing with them. He was indeed unreasonable in this matter. No matter what, as the leader of a sect, it was his natural responsibility to protect his weak disciples. Even Hakushin Jinkuan did not know what to say even if he wanted to speak up for him. In order to make up for his mistake and also to show his attitude, Reverend Idle Month, who was furious, pulled a big net and started a round of investigation in the Kunlun party, vowing to catch the abominable murderer of the devil cult. For a moment, the Kunlun party was in a state of panic, and it was a mess. Lu Chen was a little far away from the chaotic situation, so he was not disturbed too much. Flying Goose platform was quiet enough, and Su Qingjuan's past power was enough for him to stay there. However, Lu Chen was obviously not very satisfied with this. After all, he still had his own things to do. And the most important and also the most puzzling point was, who was the murderer who killed Zhang Ji? No one in this world knew better than Lu Chen how He Chongqing died. But Zhang Ji's death really confused Lu Chen. Of course, the murderer could not be himself, but it did not seem to be the traitor of the devil cult that he had been searching for. The mysterious traitor of the devil cult had already drawn a map and set a time. No matter how he thought about it, Lu Chen felt that he could not think of a reason for the traitor to suddenly appear and kill again. During this period of time, shouldn't he be hiding more discreetly? Lu Chen had a lot of doubts in his heart, so he found a reason to go to the house where Zhang Ji lived on the same day to take a look. From the outside, the house seemed to be similar to the one He Chongqing lived in. They were both the most ordinary rooms for odd job disciples. Because of the murder case, there were disciples guarding outside the house, and ordinary people were not allowed to approach. When Lu Chen stood in the distance and looked, there was a mountain breeze blowing. Soon, he smelled a bloody smell. Lu Chen did not go near there. He only looked from afar. If it was really not that the mysterious traitor suddenly went crazy and did something big again. In fact, Lu Chen did not believe this. Then the only possibility was that there was a real devil cult elite outside that had infiltrated into Kunlun Mountain. Towards this possibility, Lu Chen's expression did not even change. But just when he was about to turn and leave, his eyes suddenly looked somewhere. Over there was a very large and dense forest. Lu Chen took a long detour and entered the forest from the other side. He then walked towards the central area of the forest with ease and came to the big rock that he saw last time. He looked around and saw that all the trees were as dense as before. The air was fresh, but other than that, there seemed to be not much other than some collapsed stone pillars and slabs. Lu Chen searched the area, but he didn't find anything suspicious. He also searched the tree bark, but he didn't find anything. Just when he thought that this new devil cult sorcerer did not seem to know the rules and did not leave any token pattern to prove his identity, Lu Chen suddenly discovered another place in the forest that was somewhat different. It was that big rock. He walked up and carefully searched for a long time. Finally, near the soil, he saw a pattern. A big tree pattern with 2 leaves and 1 flower. Please show yourself and reminisce about the past. This was the meaning that Lu Chen could see in the new devil cult pattern. Then, Lu Chen's expression turned somewhat ugly. The matter was very obvious. He had used the reincarnation formation, which was rarely circulated, to set up a formation to kill He Chongqing. This matter had simultaneously attracted the attention of the traitor of the devil cult and the other devil cult members outside Kunlun Mountain. They had even extended their hands into this place. However, Lu Chen also sensed a trace of abnormality from this strange situation. That was, the devil cult people outside of Kunlun Party did not seem to be aware of the situation of this devil cult spy in Kunlun Party. Therefore, regardless of the difficulties, risking the danger of being attacked by such a powerful and famous sect like Kunlun Party, they still wanted to show their existence, intending to make contact with that spy. This made Lu Chen very surprised. Because he clearly remembered, when true Lord Tianlan told him about this matter, he clearly and directly explained to him that devil cult spy was a person who had received all of the devil cult's destiny. Such a person, how could the devil cult not know of him? Actually, after something had happened, they still thought of another way to guess and find him? This matter, there must be something wrong somewhere. Chapter 204. That day, after Lu Chen returned to the Flying Goose platform, he went to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds and the magnificent world. He sat alone for a long time. It was not until the sky turned dark and the moon rose that the moonlight shone on his body, drawing out a lonely shadow on the ground behind him. Similarly, the moonlight shone on the depths of the Kunlun mountain range, on the 4 strange peaks between the clouds and the sky. On one of the winter peaks, snow still danced in the sky. 2 figures stood side by side on the mountain path under the moonlight. They were the headmaster of Kunlun, Reverend Idle Month, and Zhuo. Reverend Idle Month did not look too good, and his expression was somewhat grim. From time to time, he would raise his head to look at the top of the winter peak. At the peak of the mountain, the howling snowstorm was wrapped into a ball. It was the cave where the legendary Hakushin Jinkuan cultivated. When will Master come out to see me? Reverend Idle Month asked Zhuo. Zhuo looked embarrassed. Senior Marshal Brother, I really can't answer you. Master's closed-door cultivation is a big matter. How can I ask how long it will take? Idle Month snorted. A trace of anxiety flashed across his face. He paced back and forth on the mountain path, looking a little upset. Zhuo advised him, Senior Marshal Brother, don't be too anxious. It's just Chen Deng, Ming Zhu, and a few others making a fuss. Can they really overturn the sky? Besides, no matter how bad the situation is, isn't Master still here? When the time comes, as long as Master appears, he will be able to intimidate everyone. I'm sure they won't dare to say another word. Idle Month nodded. It was obvious that he had the same thought in his heart. However, he quickly sighed and said, Junior Marshal Brother, what you said is not without reason. However, I still feel that something is not quite right this time. I want to discuss it with Master. Moreover, you see, for the past few years, Master has always attended every sect council meeting. If you suddenly don't attend this year, coupled with those evil sect killings, I'm afraid it will cause people to gossip and deliberately sow discord between our master and disciple relationship. Zhuo was silent. He and Reverend Idle Month had been brothers for many years. They were both disciples of Hakushin Jinkuan. Of course, he understood why Reverend Idle Month was so agitated. Back then, when the Kunlun Party was deciding on the next leader, to be honest, among the Yuanying Zhenren Idle Month was considered an outstanding figure, but he was not at the stage where he could look down on the others. There were at least 5 or 6 other Yuanying Zhenren whose cultivation and strength were not weaker than his, and there were even 1 or 2 who were obviously better than him. But in the end, the one who became the Kunlun Party's sect leader was still Idle Month. The biggest reason for this, everyone knew, was their common master, Hakushin Jinkuan. All these years, Reverend Idle Month was actually doing quite well in the position of sect leader. He was diligent and conscientious, but he could not convince the masses. There was never a lack of people who said strange things in the open and in the dark. This time, the incident of the devil cult killing people was getting bigger and bigger, and the criticism of Xian Yu Zhenren was getting louder and louder in the sect. It was no wonder that Xian Yu Zhenren was so angry and restless. In a few days' time, it would be the annual sect council meeting. Almost all the important figures in the Kunlun party would be present. At that time, it was almost expected that the evil sect killings would be brought up again. Then the doubts about Reverend Idle Month would also be raised. In front of all the important figures in the sect, of course Reverend Idle Month could not afford to lose his face. He felt that since ancient times, there had never been a sect leader of the Kunlun party who would suffer such humiliation. However, if it was like the previous years, when Hakushin Jinkuan attended and sat in the Tiankuan Peaks Zhongyang Hall, no matter which faction of people wanted to talk nonsense, it would depend on whether they had the guts to do so or not. However, as early as a few months ago, Hakushin Jinkuan had told the both of them that he might not want to attend the sect council meeting this year. Firstly, he really did not have anything important to attend. He was just there to help his disciple. Secondly, everyone felt that Reverend Idle Month had done a good job in the position of sect leader. His position was more or less stable. Therefore, he was too lazy to make the trip and simply went into closed-door cultivation. That being said, it was not wrong, but no one expected that during this period of time, the incident of the devil cult would suddenly happen, causing a storm in Kunlun's sect. From top to bottom, it was restless. Those Yuanying stage Taoist masters seemed to have found an excuse to mock and ridicule Kunlun's sect non-stop. Under such circumstances, Reverend Idle Month felt that it was better to invite her master to attend the sect council meeting again. Therefore, she came to the Winter Peak to ask for her master's help. However, according to Zhuo, Hakushin Jinkuan had been in closed-door cultivation for many days. The both of them did not dare to disturb Hakushin Jinkuan's quiet cultivation. They could only wait on the mountain path. However, after waiting for a long time, there was still no sign of Hakushin Jinkuan coming out. Reverend Idle Month was anxious. Suddenly, she said to Zhuo, "Junior brother, I have many trivial matters to attend to in the sect. I am very busy and rarely come here. Could it be that now that Master is in closed-door cultivation, even you can't contact him at all?" Zhuo smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, to be honest, I really can't contact Master now. But if you are really anxious..." He paused for a moment, then lowered his voice and said softly, "Perhaps Junior Sister has a way?" "Little Junior Sister White Lotus?" Reverend Idle Month was stunned. "What way does she have?" Zhuo said, "Master only accepted her as his last disciple when he was old. In addition, she is a rare 5-pillar talent. Naturally, he loves her deeply. Aside from instructing her wholeheartedly when he has free time, he has also handed the transcendent artifact, the Wind Speech Compass, to Junior Sister White Lotus. If there's an emergency, you can ask Junior Sister to use the Wind Speech Compass, and perhaps you can contact Master." Reverend Idle Month was suddenly enlightened. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. How could I forget about this? Junior brother, quickly bring me to little Junior Sister's cave abode. I'll ask her to contact Master for me." Zhuo was a little hesitant. He looked at the sky and said, "Senior brother, isn't it too late now?" Zhuo looked at the night sky. Indeed, it was already late at night. However, he quickly shook his head and said, "It's urgent. Let's settle it as soon as possible. Junior brother, lead the way. I'll talk to little Junior Sister." Zhuo nodded and said, "All right. Senior brother, follow me." The two of them walked down the mountain path again. After 15 minutes, they arrived in front of the 2 cave abodes. Zhuo walked over and knocked on the door before shouting loudly. The stone door of the cave abode did not move at all. Zhuo frowned and called a few more times, but there was still no response. Reverend Idle Month was a little surprised. He walked over and asked, "Is it not in the cave abode?" Zhuo shook his head. "It shouldn't be. It's so late. If I go out, I'll be breaking the sect rules. I'll call again. Maybe it's a little girl who is too sleepy to hear." As he spoke, he raised his hand again and knocked on the door while shouting. He did this for a while, but the cave abode was still tightly shut. There was no response. Zhuo turned around and looked at Reverend Idle Month. At that moment, both of them had a question in their minds at the same time. It's so late. Where could the little girl have gone? The moon shone brightly in the dark night, shining on Kunlun Mountain in the shadows. On the dark mountain path, a little girl was walking contentedly. For someone of her age to walk on an empty mountain path in the dark and cold night, it was very strange no matter how one looked at it. This little girl was, of course, White Lotus. Her beautiful face was calm. Looking at the direction she was walking in, it was towards Flying Goose platform. Her clothes fluttered in the night wind, and the high collar on her neck could be seen from time to time. That was to cover up some of the wounds. Although they were basically under control, the injuries that Lu Chen had inflicted on her that day had left a very strange wound on her neck. In the end, it still hadn't completely healed. However, for some reason, White Lotus did not seem to have too much hatred for the person called Lu Chen. This was somewhat unusual for her, who had been arrogant since she was young. Even she was a little surprised. Perhaps it was because although that person was cunning and vicious, she did not have to pretend in front of him. She could say whatever she wanted and do whatever she wanted. This was really very satisfying and comfortable. Oh, there was also that black dog. In fact, the blood food secret method was not as important as she said it was. After all, she had accidentally learned it when she was young. It was not a secret method unique to her. If she really did not care about it, then she would not care about it. Anyway, she would go and bother him first. Looking at the helpless and depressed expression of the person called Lu Chen, it was still very pleasing. White Lotus thought of this in her heart. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She quickened her pace and walked towards Flying Goose platform. Just as she was walking, her expression suddenly stiffened and her footsteps immediately came to a halt. A trace of surprise and caution flashed across her eyes. At the same time, in a dark corner in front of her, 3 rays of green light suddenly emerged from the darkness. They were like dark green flames. They were like 3 eyeballs embedded in a strange and vicious face. A dark aura gushed out from that corner. White Lotus frowned slightly and took a step back. Then, she stared in that direction with a trace of vigilance on her face. The green flame swayed slowly and gradually approached. White Lotus quickly saw that it was a 3-eyed monster shaped like a small snake. It was baring its teeth at her, revealing its terrifying fangs. The 3 green lights were 3 strange green eyes that were growing on the head of that strange creature. Hiss 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 hiss. A strange sound came from the front. A trace of uneasiness flashed across White Lotus's heart. She stared at it with her guard up. But at this moment, she suddenly discovered something strange. The 3-eyed green-eyed strange insect was staring at her, but it did not look at her face, her eyes, her hands or her feet. The 3-eyed strange insect's eyes were staring at her neck the whole time. The neck that was wrapped by the collar and had an unhealed wound. Chapter 205. It was late at night. Lu Chen was already lying on the bed. His eyes were closed, and he looked like he was asleep. However, he seemed to wake up from his dream all of a sudden. He sat up abruptly, and a strange black flame burned in his eyes as he scanned his surroundings. When familiar things came into view one after another, Lu Chen realized that he was still in the familiar small wooden house. He sighed softly. He was in a daze for a moment. Then, he leaned against the wall and pushed open the window. A ray of moonlight that was as clear as water descended from the sky and shone on him through the window sill. Lu Chen looked at the bright moon in the sky and realized that it was rounder than yesterday. Perhaps in a few days' time, it would become round again. The moonlight on the window sill was as white as a veil. The cold wind blew past, cold and lonely. Lu Chen looked at the lonely night outside the window and suddenly thought of the figure sitting on the window sill the day before yesterday. At that time, White Lotus did not look like a vicious and mysterious person. Instead, she looked more like an innocent and cute girl. However, just as he thought of this, Lu Chen immediately shook his head and threw this dangerous thought to the back of his mind. That White Lotus was innocent and cute? There must have been many people who had this kind of thought and died in her hands. At this moment, Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. In his eyes, a black flame burned again. Somewhere in the distance, there seemed to be a throbbing power that was very familiar. He had been searching for it for a long time. It was the strange 3-eyed blood-devouring bug. Lu Chen immediately became spirited. After pondering for a moment, he pressed his hand on the windowsill and floated out. Then, he took advantage of the night and blended into the darkness, flying towards the mountain path. On the winter peak in the snowstorm, Perfected Idlemonth and Wuxia stood at the entrance of White Lotus's cave abode and looked at each other. Immortal Idlemonth could not help but ask Wuxia, "Where did she go? There's a curfew in the middle of the night. If junior sister is still on Kunlun Mountain and someone sees her, it'll be a crime of disrespecting the sex rules." Wuxia smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, I really don't know. Little junior sister is extremely intelligent and has always been personally taught by master. I don't usually talk to her much." Taoist Master Idle Moon raised his head to look at the moonlight, and then looked at the even more beautiful spectacle of lightning under the moonlight, surrounded by the violent snowstorm. Then he exhaled deeply, and then sighed again. Lu Chen moved forward in the darkness, heading towards the strange aura in the distance. That aura was very strange. For some reason, it actually triggered the power of the black fire that was hidden in the deepest part of his body. Lu Chen even had a faint feeling that it was the hunger of the black fire and the divine black flame board. They were like hungry and terrifying hunters, and their prey was the blood-devouring worms. As long as he could kill the blood-devouring worms, he could absorb even more terrifying aura of the undead. The dark aura was too obvious. It was like a beacon guiding Lu Chen's direction. However, when he rushed to the mountain path, even though Lu Chen had always been bold and calm, he could not help but change his expression. On the dark mountain path in front of him, there was a petite figure standing there. Her hands were raised high, and there were traces of ice and snow flowing from her fingertips. On the ground beside her, Lu Chen actually saw the corpses of several blood-devouring worms. Almost all of the blood-devouring worms were tightly wrapped in ice and snow. They looked extremely stiff. They were probably frozen to death. At this moment, White Lotus also seemed to have seen Lu Chen. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at him. Then she suddenly laughed and said, "How is it? Am I considered powerful?" Lu Chen glanced at the corpses of the blood-devouring worms on the ground and could not help but smile bitterly. Then he nodded and said, "Powerful." Ha! White Lotus seemed to be happy all of a sudden. She put down her raised hands and walked towards Lu Chen. Then she said casually, "I originally wanted to go to the Flying Goose platform to find you, but I did not expect to encounter such strange things on the way. They were extremely vicious, so I simply killed them all." "Admirable." Lu Chen nodded and said to White Lotus. White Lotus laughed and kept walking. At the same time she said, "Are your words sincere or not?" Lu Chen thought for a while and said, "Your cultivation method might just be able to restrain this kind of monster. But no matter what, it is still powerful." White Lotus laughed. At this time, she had already walked in front of Lu Chen. Then she smiled sweetly and said, "Then why are you here? Are you here to pick me up?" "Stop dreaming. How could I come to pick you up?" Lu Chen snorted at White Lotus's words. Just as he was about to say a few more words to mock her, he suddenly saw White Lotus's body suddenly shake a few times. She closed her eyes and did not make a sound. It was as if she had suddenly become a walking corpse and fell down. Lu Chen was shocked and subconsciously reached out to hug White Lotus's body. But as soon as he touched her body, Lu Chen's expression changed greatly. It was like the roar of darkness in the night, suddenly exploding in front of him. A wave of darkness surged over and instantly wrapped around his body. This feeling was the aura of the strange three-eyed worm. It could not be wrong. Lu Chen's expression changed several times. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and tore open Bai Lian's right sleeve with a ripping sound. Immediately, a strand of black qi appeared on her abnormally white wrist. At the same time, a twisted protruding mark suddenly sprang up from the back of her hand. Then, it crazily rushed up, and it looked like it was about to rush past her shoulder and into her chest. Lu Chen snorted coldly. He suddenly grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand and then fiercely clawed down. His 5 fingers instantly turned black. Then, black flames gushed out from his hand and directly burned into White Lotus's flesh. White Lotus lost her voice and cried out in pain. But at the same time, the black gas that was rushing up suddenly stopped. It seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing in the world. For a moment, it did not dare to rush forward. Instead, it turned around and fled. But at this time, Lu Chen grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand. His other hand followed the route and directly wrapped around White Lotus's elbow. After a moment, there was a sudden scream. A strange three-eyed worm rushed out from White Lotus's wrist with its fangs and claws bared. After the strange worm broke out, White Lotus moaned and directly fell to the ground. It looked like she had fainted. And Lu Chen looked at the evil blood-sucking worm that flew into the air and seemed to want to escape. He suddenly reached out and directly grabbed the body of the blood-sucking worm in the air. The blood-sucking worm roared and turned its head. It seemed to be completely enraged. Just as it was about to attack Lu Chen, there was suddenly a deep and boundless black flame that was like an iron curtain that suddenly burned. It burned on Lu Chen's hand. It also burned on White Lotus's arm. Even from her neck, there were a few strange black lights that lit up. Under such a pincer attack, the blood-sucking worm had no way out. It was instantly burnt and melted in that raging black flame. Everything quieted down and the tranquility of the night was restored. Lu Chen stood in the same place and muttered to himself for a moment. Then he bent down and picked up all the carcasses of the blood-sucking worms. Carrying the unconscious White Lotus, he turned around and left with large strides. Lu Chen brought White Lotus back to his wooden house. In fact, he didn't really want to do this. But first of all, he really didn't know where to send this girl. Even if he knew White Lotus was a member of Kunwu City's by clan, it was the middle of the night and there was a curfew, so he naturally couldn't send her there. Everything could only wait until the sun rose tomorrow. Apart from this, Lu Chen had another reason why he couldn't give up on White Lotus. It was the sudden appearance of the strange three-eyed worm. Why did this vicious worm, known as an ancient killing weapon, suddenly besiege White Lotus? He felt that he had to get to the bottom of this matter. White Lotus's body, or the foundation of White Lotus's cultivation, was far more powerful than Lu Chen imagined. At first, Lu Chen expected White Lotus to sleep for half a day. But in fact, White Lotus only woke up after an hour. What happened? After seeing that White Lotus had woken up, Lu Chen didn't bother to inquire about her well-being and directly asked her. White Lotus also seemed very straightforward. She said, "I don't know. I'm asking about those strange three-eyed worms. Why did they suddenly attack you?" "I don't know either." White Lotus sat up with some difficulty. Then, like how Lu Chen sat most of the time, she leaned against the wall next to the window and said, "In any case, there were no signs at the beginning. Several of them suddenly rushed out and almost swallowed me alive." Lu Chen furrowed his brows, clearly a little puzzled. On the contrary, White Lotus seemed to be more at ease. Taking advantage of this rare free time, she looked at the somewhat messy little wooden hut and then looked at the night sky on the windowsill. Her face showed a trace of a gratified smile. Probably because of this quiet scenery, White Lotus's heart finally calmed down. Then, she concentrated for a moment and suddenly said, "But I saw a strange phenomenon." Lu Chen's spirit was shaken. He stared at her and said, "What is it?" White Lotus said, "Just now, all those strange three-eyed worms, I don't know why, from the beginning to the end, all of them seemed to be staring at my neck, as if there was a peerless delicacy on my neck." Lu Chen's expression slightly changed. He said in a low voice, "Your neck." White Lotus smiled and said, "It's the wound that you caused and hasn't healed yet. Why do I have a feeling that although those strange worms don't look smart, perhaps they are very interested in the thing that you cultivate with. One day, they will come for you again." White Lotus said threateningly, as if she was pronouncing a sentence to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was silent. He thought to himself, could it be that those blood-devouring worms also have an abnormal desire for the power of the black flame? He then thought of the unimaginably terrible dark power that had appeared in the depths of Kunlun during the great earthquake in Kunlun. Lu Chen stared at White Lotus and did not speak. White Lotus felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She frowned and asked, "What are you looking at?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "Young girl, put on your clothes first." Chapter 206. White Lotus stared blankly for a moment, then suddenly cried out in alarm, subconsciously raising her hands to cover her chest. However, her right arm was injured, and she had only raised it halfway before her face paled. She groaned in pain and directly drooped down. In the end, she could only use one hand to cover her chest. But very quickly, just as she was about to yell at Lu Chen for being despicable and shameless, White Lotus suddenly discovered that most of her clothes were still intact. The only thing missing was her injured right arm. The sleeve from the shoulder down had been torn off, revealing her white jade-like skin. It was an exceptionally moving sight. But at this moment, on her arm, there were still a few wounds. The flesh on her wrist had split open, and there were a few startling black fingerprints on her shoulder. At this time, Lu Chen opened his mouth and said, "What are you screaming for? Isn't it just a torn sleeve? I kindly advised you to put on some clothes to prevent you from catching a cold. Why do you look like your entire body has been seen by someone?" White Lotus spat and looked at Lu Chen with disdain. "You're a man and you're taking advantage of my tongue. Aren't you embarrassed?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "Hey little girl, speak clearly. What do you mean I took advantage of you? Just now, I risked my life to save you from the mouth of that strange three-eyed insect." White Lotus sneered and said, "Don't give me that. You stinky men, do you think I don't understand? Don't you all see that I am beautiful and want to take advantage of me? You have all kinds of dirty thoughts. Do you dare say you don't?" "I don't." Lu Chen's expression was solemn as he said to White Lotus, "I have to make this clear to you. I don't have the slightest bit of that kind of thought." White Lotus looked at him and said, "Then let me ask you, what do you think of my appearance? Is it considered beautiful?" "Of course not." Lu Chen paused for a moment. It seemed that he still couldn't deceive his conscience. He muttered and said, "All right, you are indeed beautiful, but I am not interested. Only a ghost would believe you. There isn't a single good man in this world." Lu Chen said, "You're just a little girl. Where did you learn so many messy things? I won't talk about those cruel and vicious methods. You're so young. What do you know about these matters between a man and a woman?" White Lotus said angrily, "Don't look down on me. I know everything." Then he sneered and said, "If I didn't know all this, I'm afraid I would have been fooled by you stinky men." Lu Chen looked her up and down and suddenly laughed. He shook his head and didn't say anything. White Lotus didn't know why, but she felt more and more uncomfortable being stared at like this. She became more and more annoyed and said angrily, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a beauty like me?" Lu Chen sternly said, "It's fine if you scold me for my low skill, cruel methods and low moral character. In any case, we've fought and killed several times these past few days. We're enemies and not friends. But no matter what, you can't slander me for liking a little girl like you. I'm not interested in you." White Lotus was furious. She slapped the windowsill and said angrily, "Tell me clearly, what do you mean by this? You're saying I'm ugly?" Lu Chen said, "You're not ugly, but I'm not blind. I'm just not interested in you." Seeing that White Lotus was so angry that her face turned pale and looked like she was about to get up and fight, Lu Chen hurriedly waved his hand and said, Hey. Do you have any upbringing? You're still a girl at such a young age. You're always talking about killing people at the slightest provocation. Can you listen to me properly?" White Lotus angrily sat back down and glared at Lu Chen. "Tell me, what do you mean by your words?" Lu Chen shrugged and said, "I don't mean anything. I do like women, but they have to be mature women. You're just a 10-year-old girl. How could I be interested in you?" White Lotus was stunned for a moment. Her expression softened a little, but then she revealed a suspicious expression. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Are you serious?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "Why would I lie to you? In short, if you're worried, you can leave now. I won't send you off." White Lotus thought for a moment. She put on her clothes and got off the bed. She said, "I'd better go. You're unreliable. I want to stay away from you." Lu Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stepped aside and shook his head with a smile. "Then you'd better keep your word. Stay away from me in the future. Don't come looking for me." White Lotus walked a few steps and suddenly turned her head to look at him. She said, Have you slept with other women before?" Lu Chen was stunned. Then he nodded calmly and said, "Yes." "Disgusting," White Lotus said. "What do you know?" Lu Chen scolded with a smile. White Lotus thought for a moment and said, "I don't believe that the women you slept with before were more beautiful than me. What makes you say that I'm not as good as them?" "Ah." Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment, he waved his hand to drive away White Lotus. He said, "You're getting more and more outrageous. Is this something a little girl like you can ask?" White Lotus was unmoved. She sneered and said, Can a little girl kill and bleed like me? Lu Chen rolled his eyes. White Lotus said to him, "Tell me clearly and I'll leave immediately. Otherwise, I won't feel comfortable if I don't understand this matter." Lu Chen looked at her elegant and beautiful face. She was like a fairy. Suddenly he had a kind of illusion. After a moment, he sighed. He thought that this world was really full of evildoers. Eccentric people could be seen everywhere. "All right, you can leave after I say it." Lu Chen said to her, "Women and girls are different. Besides a face, there are many parts of a woman's body that are equally charming. You're still young and don't have it yet. So, I like other women, but I'm not interested in you. You don't have to worry that I'll do something indecent to you. Can you understand what I'm saying now?" White Lotus stared at him. Lu Chen looked calm and met her gaze. The two looked at each other for a moment. White Lotus suddenly blushed. She reached out and hugged her chest. She spat and said, "Shameless. Vulgar. Shameless." After saying that, she turned around and ran away like a wisp of smoke. Only Lu Chen was left in a daze. He was stunned and speechless. After a long while he said blankly, "What did I do this time? She called me shameless, vulgar and shameless again." There were only 5 days left until the night of the full moon. The Kunlun party could be said to be tight on the inside but loose on the outside. The sect council was closely related to the majority of high-level cultivators. However, for the vast majority of the lowest-level disciples, it was like two different worlds. The head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukan Junren, was in a good mood recently. The biggest reason was, of course, his beloved disciple, He had recently rushed to the Jindan realm and became a Jindan friar. In terms of age, He was not even 30 years old. Although he was a few years older than Masato Kahara's disciple, Su Qingjun, at his age, to be able to practice to the Jindan realm was still an astonishing achievement. His future achievements could absolutely be said to be limitless. At least, in the praises and comments of the elders, the evaluation of He was almost exactly the same as that of Su Qingjun. Yuanying was within reach, and there was hope for a true monarch. For the younger generation of cultivators, there was almost no higher evaluation than this sentence regarding their talent, innate aptitude, and potential. It was also because of this that Dukan Junren was very proud. However, in this happy mood, there were still some flaws. For example, his most supported senior brother, Idle Month, was not having a good time recently. Another example was his newly advanced disciple, He. Although he had cultivated to the Jindan realm, he did not look ecstatic and looked solemn all day long. Dukan Junren, of course, was well aware of the reason for this. And to be honest, these two things were caused by one thing, and that was the evil devil cult killing people. The first thing had just calmed down, and the result was that it happened again. These evildoers of the devil cult were simply rampant and lawless. It was hateful that they were as timid as mice and did not dare to come out to fight. They only dared to hide in the dark corners and plot against those almost powerless odd-job disciples. It was despicable. Dukan Junren had always been the most staunch supporter of spiritual master Idle Month. He was very disgusted with the actions of the few spiritual masters of Bai Chao Tang. It was clearly the evil deeds of the evildoers of the devil cult, but Chen Deng, Ming Zhu and the others were pointing the spearhead at their senior brother. However, although he thought so in his heart, when someone suggested to him that He should come out again to continue investigating the devil cult, Dukan Junren still firmly refused. He really felt sorry for his disciple and did not want him to get involved in this mess again. These days, because the sect council was imminent, he was also very busy. But occasionally when he had free time, he would call He along for a walk, as a way to ease his anxiety. He knew his disciple too well. He was talented, but his thoughts were too deep, and many things were bottled up in his heart. And a few days ago, the death of his most valued younger brother, He Gang, had a much deeper impact on He than what he showed on the surface. Therefore, on this day, when he and He were casually walking on the mountain and chatting, he also deliberately mentioned this to him. He was an extremely intelligent person, and almost immediately understood his master's deep meaning. He immediately thanked his master. Dukan Junren had a gratified smile on his face, but he still sighed in his heart. The more normal he behaved, the more it showed that the knot in his heart had not been untied, and could only be left for the future. The two walked for a while, and when they were ready to return to the mountain, He said to Dukan Junren, Master, I don't want to go back for the time being, so I'll just walk around here. You are busy, so you should go back first. Dukan Junren glanced at him and said, All right, then you take care of yourself, remember what I said to you just now. He smiled and said, Master, rest assured, disciple understands. Dukan Junren smiled and flew up into the air. He looked at his master's disappearing figure. The smile on his face slowly disappeared. Not long after, he heaved a long sigh, but his face revealed some melancholy as he turned around and walked away. Just that he had only walked a few steps when his footsteps suddenly froze, and his expression changed greatly. He suddenly discovered that beside him, a huge figure had suddenly appeared there. Like a ghost, even with his current cultivation, he did not sense it at all. Chapter 207. To a Jindan friar, in terms of cultivation realm, it could already be said to be extremely powerful. Looking at the entire cultivation world, countless cultivators, countless families, wherever he went, he could be considered as an elite. And with Jindan friar's sharp senses, perhaps if they really fought, he might not be a match for the more powerful Yuanying realm Junren. But for a Yuanying Junren to suddenly approach Jindan friar without anyone noticing, that was also extremely difficult. But right now, he suddenly met such a person. A huge and fat figure suddenly appeared beside him, so close at hand. At that moment, it was like the blood in He Yi's entire body had frozen, and he practically instinctively let out a furious roar as he retreated. At the same time, he swung his arm and struck out with his strongest Dao art and divine ability. A bright light suddenly lit up, pierced through that shadow, his body like an arrow leaving the bow retreated, looked like he was about to break through the darkness. But the strange thing happened again. That huge figure like a shadow followed, directly followed up, and following what seemed to be a casual sound of a sleeve fluttering, an instant later, all of He Yi's supernatural powers were all broken, dissipated into nothingness. Heaven and earth were silent. All living things were silent. A gust of aura came from the shadow in front of He Yi. That tall and sturdy figure had a mountain-like imposing manner, like covering the sky and covering the earth, pressing down on him. He Yi's body shook violently, staggered back. Suddenly his legs softened, he almost knelt down. But he tried his best to hold on, until that tall and fat man lowered his head. A pair of eyes landed on his face. Like a sudden clap of thunder, instantly exploded, He Yi's mind went blank in that instant. He directly sat on the ground, his entire body drenched in sweat, his face pale, almost devoid of blood. The pressure like landslide and tsunami swept over. He felt that his entire body's flesh and bones seemed to be out of control. Perhaps the next moment it would collapse and explode. His heart was also extremely shocked. This was the first time in his life that he met such a terrifying person, almost not like a mortal, like a deity. Deity. At that moment, his eyes suddenly widened. He stared at the tall and sturdy figure in front of him. For some reason, even though he was right in front of him, even though that person seemed to be looking at him, his mind still couldn't reflect that person's face. Was this the might of a true monarch of the divine transformation stage? He didn't dare to look anymore. He was afraid that if he held on any longer, he would really turn into ashes. He could only lower his head and kneel on the ground with a thud. He said in a hoarse voice, Disciple He pays respect to immortal. It was rare for Su Qingjun to get up early in the morning. After she greeted Lu Chen, she hurriedly went down the mountain. Her destination was her home in Kunwu City. The reason was also very simple. The Su family at the foot of the mountain had sent word that Sumo's condition, which had originally stabilized, had worsened in the past 2 days. Watching Su Qingjuan's receding figure, Lu Chen's expression became somewhat cold. In his heart, he recalled the mysterious corpse watcher in the dark grave. The mind-manipulating technique was a very overbearing divine ability. It seemed that he didn't show any mercy to Sumo that day, and it really hurt her very foundation. Standing on the Fian platform that had once again become quiet, Lu Chen's expression fluctuated and his brows were tightly knitted. The situation had already begun to become more and more chaotic. Lu Chen even had a feeling that it was beyond his expectations. Moreover, he always felt that there were some variables in this matter that he hadn't thought of before. Who was that so-called traitor of the devil cult? What was he planning to do by lurking on the mountain of Kunlun? But why didn't the people of the devil cult seem to know of his existence? All these doubts intertwined with each other, making him feel as if he had fallen into a mess. He only felt that everything in front of him was chaotic, and he couldn't see what was going to happen in the future. In another 5 days, it would be the night of the full moon. According to the agreement made by the traitor of the devil cult, he and Lu Chen would meet on that night. Perhaps that would be the time when the truth would be revealed. But would things really be so simple? Perhaps because he had been in the dark for too long, Lu Chen always subconsciously felt doubtful. He always felt that there was no such simple thing in this world. Sometimes he also knew that what he was thinking was actually wrong, but the habit he had developed over the years always made him involuntarily think this way. Perhaps it was better to make some preparations first? Has the damned Baldy come back? At noon that day, Lu Chen also came to Kunwu City and asked Old Ma in the Black Hill Pavilion. Seeing that Lu Chen had come, Atsu was very happy. It ran to his side and jumped up and down, appearing to be very affectionate. Seeing Atsu's appearance, Lu Chen also smiled and kept reaching out to stroke its head. He then raised his eyes to look at Old Ma. Old Ma shrugged and said, "I don't know. But since he promised to come back before the night of the full moon you mentioned, it should be in the next few days." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Good. If he comes back and contacts you, find a way to notify me, or tell him to come find me. I have some things to ask him." Old Ma's eyes flashed and he said, "What's wrong? Is there something?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "There are some things I feel strange about, so I want to ask him." Old Ma seemed to want to ask more questions, but when he saw Lu Chen's expression, he quickly swallowed his words. After a while he nodded and said, "Good. Don't worry. I'll inform you immediately if there's any news." Lu Chen smiled and nodded at him. He then squatted down and played with Atsu for a while before saying, "I'll send Atsu away today. I don't want to leave it here with you." Old Ma asked, "Where do you plan to send it?" Lu Chen said, "I don't have a fixed place. I'll just find a mountain forest a bit further away from the city and let it stay there. After the night of the full moon, I'll finish my business and come to find it." Old Ma frowned and said, "You'll just leave it alone in the mountain forest? Will something happen to it?" Lu Chen laughed and patted Atsu's head. Then he stood up and said, "It's okay. This dog has become stronger recently. It will survive. Right, Atsu?" He lowered his head and asked Atsu. Atsu wagged his tail and barked a few times, as if he was responding to his words. Old Ma glanced at Atsu and suddenly made a gesture to Lu Chen, asking him to follow him to the side. Then he looked slightly serious and said to Lu Chen, "What's wrong with this dog?" Lu Chen said, "There's nothing wrong with it. It's quite good." Old Ma snorted and said, "Don't lie to me with this kind of nonsense. There must be something wrong with Atsu. That's why you're so sneaky. By the way, there's something I haven't told you yet. It's also related to Atsu." Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. Looking at Old Ma's serious expression, he couldn't help but be a little surprised and said, "What happened?" Old Ma took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Recently, I found that some animal corpses often appear around this house. Most of them are wild cats and dogs. Occasionally, there are birds, chickens, and ducks. They all died in the same way. Their throats were directly bitten by sharp teeth, and then they bled to death." Lu Chen was silent for a moment. His expression also became cold. He glanced at Old Ma and said, "What do you think?" Old Ma pointed at Atsu in the distance and said, "Did it do it?" Lu Chen said, "I'm not in the city, and I didn't see it with my own eyes. I don't know, but Atsu has never done this kind of thing before." Old Ma looked at him deeply and said, "You really don't have anything to hide from me, right?" Lu Chen met his gaze and suddenly smiled, saying, "Of course there is." Old Ma was furious and said, "Damn it! I knew you weren't honest. Tell me." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "There are some things that I don't need to tell you. In short, you have to believe me. I won't do anything bad to you." Old Ma looked at him for a while and suddenly sighed and said, "Well, be careful." Lu Chen looked at him and his eyes gradually became gentle. He gently patted his shoulder and suddenly said, "Old Ma, after this, why don't we both retire?" He smiled and said, "These days are quite boring." Old Ma was silent for a moment and said, "Okay." Lu Chen took Black Dog out of Kunwu City. Along the way, He saw the Su family's mansion in the distance. He could see that although the mansion looked calm on the outside, everyone inside seemed to be in a hurry and had solemn expressions. He looked at it for a while and then turned around and left. After leaving Kunwu City, Atsu was even happier and kept running on the wide road. Lu Chen didn't keep walking along the road and quickly led it to the wilderness. As they walked, they arrived at the foot of a nameless hill more than 10 miles away from Kunwu City. There was a forest on the hill and the area was vast. There was no one around, which was exactly what it meant to be a wilderness. Lu Chen called Atsu over and stroked its head. He then squatted down and stared at Atsu's eyes. Atsu suddenly became nervous and took a step back. Lu Chen shook his head and said softly, "You've already drunk the heart's blood and your bloodline has been stimulated. It's almost impossible for you to live like before. The night of the full moon will be the time for you to transform and advance. At that time, no one will be able to help you and you can only rely on yourself." Since ancient times, the sacred beasts of the southern part of the chaotic land have all narrowly escaped death like this. If you can't pass this trial, then find a place to die. Lu Chen quietly said to it. Atsu lowered its head. As if it had sensed something, a complicated light suddenly appeared in its eyes. It slowly leaned forward, stuck out its tongue and licked Lu Chen's hand. Lu Chen glanced at the towering Kunlun mountain in the distance and said, "In the next few days, I also have to work on that mountain. It should be very dangerous. I'm not sure if I'll survive." You see, people like us who have been shadows for a long time are all like this. We always feel like we're in danger of dying. Tell me, what's the point of living like this? Am I right, Atsu? Lu Chen sat on the ground and said to Atsu. Atsu slowly walked over and squatted down next to Lu Chen. It looked like it was sitting side by side with him. The sky unknowingly darkened. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on their backs. "I hope we can still meet after the night of the full moon," Lu Chen said. Woof. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.